In 2016, 22-year-old Julia Enright was studying at the Massachusetts Medical College in the USA. At that time, she met a young man named Brandon Chicklese, who was 18. Brandon was a technology student, fulfilling his dream of becoming a heating and ventilation technician. Julia and Brandon were completely different from each other. Julia dressed and behaved as differently as possible, whereas Brandon dressed modestly and was kind and calm. Brandon grew up surrounded and cared for by his parents. He had been a Boy Scout for over 10 years, was described by those who knew him well as responsive and open. When he and Julia started dating, their union seemed like a real attraction of opposites. Gradually, they began an intimate relationship, and Julia involved Brandon in unusual forms of intimacy. Given their age, it was not easy to find privacy for such experiments, so Julia suggested using a treehouse owned by one of her friends. The house was abandoned and located in a wooded area just a few kilometers away from the suburban homes where Julia was born and raised. Over time, the owner stopped visiting the secluded place, and Julia began to use the house freely. She decorated her improvised shelter with chains and other paraphernalia, turning it into a base for their experiments. Her collection of unique objects began to form there. By the time Brandon first visited this place, an eerie atmosphere pervaded it, inspiring dark thoughts. However, he tolerated the oddities of his girlfriend, and they regularly met there. But as their relationship developed, Brandon increasingly felt that they were not right for each other. Eventually, he realized that further development of their relationship was impossible. Brandon suggested breaking up and remaining friends. Julia agreed. It seemed that both of them calmly separated, demonstrating emotional maturity. In 2018, Brandon lived with his parents in the small town of Rindge, New Hampshire. He had obtained the qualification for which he had studied and worked so long, becoming a heating engineer. He started dating another girl and was preparing to celebrate his birthday in July. It seemed that, despite his young age, he had managed to achieve something significant. He had an education, a stable job, and a relationship with a girl. He sincerely told his family that he felt happier than ever. Shortly before this period, Brandon thought he had gained the necessary experience and was ready to open his own business in heating systems. He began to take action, and everyone gave him great support for this initiative. Relatives, friends, and his girlfriend all recognized that Brandon was just the type of person who could successfully run his own business. Unfortunately, it was not destined for him to realize these dreams. On June 23, 2018, Brandon left home to visit relatives in Windham, New Hampshire. For this, he had to travel about 80 kilometers, just over an hour's journey. He left home at around 1 p.m., but he did not return to his relatives by evening. Any attempts to contact him were ignored. His family, girlfriend, and grandmother were understandably panicking. This behavior was completely uncharacteristic of Brandon. His mobile phone was turned off, a situation he had never experienced before, as he had a busy schedule and could receive calls from new clients at any moment. Unfortunately, in order to contact the authorities to report a missing person, they had to wait at least a day. On the morning of June 24th, Brandon's parents went to the police station. They presented their arguments in detail and were very worried because Brandon was not prone to spontaneous parties or meetings with friends, did not suffer from any mental problems. Generally should not have disappeared anywhere. Law enforcement began to search for traces of Brandon in Windham. However, despite their efforts, they could find no evidence that he had even reached the city. There were no traces of his car, including on recordings from CCTV cameras. Brandon did not buy anything in Windham, did not pay for gas with his card, and did not use his phone. In this state of having no leads, 5 days passed. Family members searched for him, but increasingly, the thought that they would not see their loved one again haunted them. Finally, on June 29th, a gray Honda Civic was found in the parking lot of the Hannaford supermarket on Route 202 in Rindge, New Hampshire. It was Brandon's car. It was unclear how the car appeared there, especially since it was unlocked and the keys were left in the ignition. This only strengthened the suspicion that something terrible had occurred. Brandon would never have treated his property this way. Such methods are often used by criminals to provoke the theft of a vehicle, leaving fingerprints behind to set up innocent people. During this time, relatives continued their search, distributing, pasting flyers throughout Brandon's hometown and the surrounding area. Unfortunately, all these efforts were in vain. On July 10, 2018, a random runner training in a forested area in Ringe made a horrifying discovery just 10 kilometers from the shopping center where Brandon's car was found. He located a human body, which was hidden in the bushes only tens of meters from the side of the highway. The remains of the young man were wrapped in tarpaulin, and his hands and feet were bound with tape. Given the condition of the body at the time of discovery, most of the flesh had rotted away, exposing the bones. When law enforcement officers arrived at the scene, they immediately stated that this method of hiding the body was not chosen by chance. In fact, such extensive decomposition is an extremely effective way to get rid of evidence in the shortest possible time. Autopsy results showed the victim was Brandon Chiklis. It was believed that the detectives were dealing with a fairly experienced killer who knew how to evade justice. The perpetrator probably carefully studied related materials, and perhaps this was not his first crime. Suspicion only increased when investigators managed to find the shirt that Brandon had been wearing. It had several distinct cuts, apparently from a knife. Judging by this item of clothing, the victim had been stabbed 12 times. Unfortunately, the forensic expert could not confirm all of these wounds due to the body's condition. Perhaps they were more due to the high degree of decomposition. Thus, the expert could only speak with certainty about the traces left on the bones. For the same reason, it was not possible to establish the exact cause of death. It was possible that Brandon was tortured, but proving or disproving such guesses turned out to be impossible. No matter how hard the investigators tried, they were unable to find his mobile phone. It was apparently destroyed or discarded. Since the moment of Brandon's disappearance, they could not connect to his means of communication. This only confirmed the idea that the crime was committed by an experienced killer who knew that any information carriers and means of communication were compromising. This strategy was effective, as the police could not even establish the route Brandon had taken before his death or after the murder. Fortunately, the detectives still had access to the list of calls from Brandon's mobile phone before it was turned off. When they received this information from the operator, they discovered that the last call before his disappearance and the switching off of his mobile phone was made near the home of his ex-girlfriend, Julia. Investigators assumed he could have visited her before leaving. As soon as the patrol officers arrived near Julia's house, they immediately suspected something was wrong. There was an unbearable smell of rotting flesh. Even more shocking discoveries awaited within the house. Officers found decomposing bodies of animals literally everywhere in the rooms. Outside, they were wrapped in tarpaulin, and inside, in various containers, there were BDSM kits, specific paraphernalia, knives, and related photos. In fact, this house became the most horrifying location in the memory of all the participants of the first encounter with Julia. Julia lived alone in her father's house. She worked as a phlebotomist in a clinical laboratory, dealing with blood, collecting it for analysis, and preparing samples. Given the respect that doctors receive in the USA, it was a rather esteemed profession. Julia was always a peculiar person. As it turned out, these quirks went far beyond the bounds of normalcy. Her work was not just a way for her to help people and earn a living, it became something much more. During the day, she worked as a phlebotomist, but at night, she turned into another person. She became quite famous in the escort industry, acting as a mistress. Her friends and acquaintances knew of Julia's BDSM fetish, which she openly discussed. She claimed that only willing participants were involved in her activities, insisting that it was a form of entertainment and that all clients left satisfied. However, none of her acquaintances suspected the dangers involved. Despite her fears and risks, she decided to take a big step, even posting an ad on a specialized website inviting everyone to engage in play involving knives and blood. According to the description, it was supposed to be BDSM domination, which involved lightly injuring the client and allowing them to bleed. This was a specific category of entertainment. There would always be clients willing to participate. Moreover, no one should care about what happens in someone else's bed if it is done by mutual consent. However, such activities always suspiciously resemble a front to cover up darker deeds or even a trap for naive partners. As it turned out, Julia had her own skeletons in the closet. She didn't just associate her life with blood, it was more akin to an obsession. In fact, she had a fascination not only with blood but also with dead flesh. She had a real collection of dead animals displayed in jars, among them large specimens like ravens. Additionally, almost constantly in her courtyard lay decomposing animal bodies, which she wrapped in tarpaulin to speed up decomposition from the heat and then used their bones for her artistic compositions. Despite the nightmarish aspects and especially the terrible smell, Julia perceived some sort of beauty in this and embodied it through her art. Unfortunately, her vision of beauty proved too perverse and cruel to earn her a place among artists. Moreover, Julia had a whole collection of vials filled with blood and used condoms. She was obsessed with serial killers. She once even described a kind of ritual in which she personally participated. When a whole group of people gathered, they acted out scenes with vampires and actually drank some of each other's blood. Despite these suspicious hobbies, Julia had friends and willingly demonstrated her creativity. She always claimed that she had no talent in art, but in this way, she expressed her vision of the world. In fact, time and time again, Julia showed her friends the remains of animals, which were laid out in specific patterns. Of course, most people were concerned about where she got all these bodies. To such questions, Julia always answered briefly that everything necessary for this so-called art was found in a forest or on the side of the road. Julia insisted that she did not harm living beings but found and used the bodies of dead animals. Considering that in everyday life she was very quiet and avoided conflicts, people believed that this was just an oddity. Apparently, Julia's inner circle didn't know about Jeffrey Dahmer. This infamous man once started with a similar fixation. He also collected dead animals and became obsessed with the study of remains. He described his passion as an alternative vision of the world or creativity. Like Julia, Dahmer surrounded himself with things of a frankly creepy nature, and naturally, this could not end well. Julia kept a detailed diary in which she described her life and her activities exploring her own psyche. It seemed she was not fully aware that her hobbies looked strange and provocative. She continued to view them as creative pursuits and spoke somewhat arrogantly about people who did not understand art and beauty. However, there were less philosophical notes in the diary. She described bloodthirstiness as a charming character trait and revealed her unhealthy attitude toward death. From the very first entry, she constantly talked about her obsessive desire to kill a person. Julia considered it the height of bloodthirstiness, a manifestation of insatiability, which excited and attracted her. Julia repeatedly mentioned that she was driven to this monstrous act by a certain hunger that arose with every thought of killing a person. All this frightening data was obtained during the investigation. The longer the police dug to understand who Julia was, the more shocked they became. For the detectives, it became obvious that they had encountered a potential serial killer. The biggest source of incriminating data was her mobile phone, which was taken for examination. As it turned out, shortly before Brandon's disappearance, Julia had met a new boyfriend named Jonathan Lind. They were both rather dark personalities, making them perfectly suited for each other. The night before Brandon's disappearance, immediately after the incident, Julia sent Jonathan a message containing the alarming phrase, "bloodbath." Detectives immediately noted that the treatment of Brandon's body was identical to the method Julia had used to accelerate the decomposition of animal remains. Even more unusual was the message sent to Brandon the day before his disappearance, in which Julia asked if he would come to visit her treehouse. The investigation established that a few weeks before her death, Julia was actively trying to improve her relationship with her ex since there were difficulties with the current girlfriend of Brandon. In fact, they were on the verge of breaking up due to her betrayal. Probably as a result of this, Julia managed to draw him in. In the end, he agreed to meet her at a kind of BDSM club, perhaps thinking of this visit to his ex as an act of reconciliation. Immediately after Brandon agreed to Julia's invitation, she wrote to her new boyfriend Jonathan that there was a surprise for him. By communicating with the neighbors of Julia, the police easily uncovered details of her intimate relationships and preferences. She openly shared this information with the entire neighborhood and seemed to even speak with pride about her activities in the intimate sphere. Gradually, the detectives came into possession of a business card on which she suggested playing with a knife and blood. There were witnesses who testified that Julia and her new boyfriend liked to cut each other during intimate. However, she herself would discuss it openly without the slightest embarrassment. When she ended up at the station for questioning, she laid out all the details. Surprisingly, after this conversation with Julia, the police officers let her go. She managed to convince them that despite her oddities, she was not involved in the murders and that there was no concrete evidence against her. According to Julia's confession, she truly intended to meet Brandon on that fateful day, but he never showed up. She sent him a message in the evening, but the guy never responded. Finally, one of the police officers decided to verify the information and found other messages from Brandon that Julia had not mentioned. Those messages made it clear that the former lovers had indeed met. This fleeting lie raised suspicions that the detectives had encountered a manipulative individual who needed to be further investigated. These guesses turned out to be correct. The more the police talked to Julia, the more she changed her story. Eventually, she admitted that she did meet with Brandon that evening. According to her, after a short conversation, he left to buy banned substances for the night, but the guy never returned and did not answer her calls, so she just went home. This also turned out to be a lie, as the guy did not use banned substances. After the lie was revealed, the detective spoke to the neighbors of Julia again, and they found out about the treehouse in the woods that Julia had turned into a BDSM headquarters. The officers focused on finding this hideout and managed to arrive there with her new boyfriend. It was obvious that the house had been thoroughly cleaned. There was even new furniture and a new carpet. Everything looked suspicious, as if someone had tried to cover up evidence of a crime. The carpet attracted the most attention. It looked out of place in this treehouse, as did the cleanliness, especially in sharp contrast to the chains and jars of blood and animal bodies. As soon as the carpet was lifted, it became evident that it was covering very large, washed-out blood stains. Similar traces were found under the floorboards. Blood also was on the steps and tree trunks. They had obviously tried to wash it off, but in vain, so they simply covered it with a carpet. It resembled a bloodbath. Judging by the number and size of these marks, it was clear that they were related to a deceased victim. Julia insisted that all these traces belonged to dead animals she had collected on the street. After searching the car, blood was also found there. Julia denied that Brandon was ever in the car or that they met in the treehouse on the day of the disappearance. However, DNA testing showed that she was lying, as most of the traces belonged to Brandon. As soon as the detectives presented this evidence, she changed her story again. Julia claimed that after her meeting with Brandon, they got very drunk. He went to get banned substances, and then they met in the treehouse. According to her confession, her ex-boyfriend attacked her, demanding intimate, but Julia resisted, justifying herself by saying that she had a new boyfriend. However, this did not help, as Brandon attacked and tried to abuse her. According to her, at that moment, she had no choice. Julia managed to reach for a knife, which she always carried on her belt. She claimed to have stabbed Brandon several times in self-defense. Afterward, Julia, in a state of shock, admitted that she could not even move from the spot, so she remained beside the wounded Brandon for about 40 minutes. During this time, he simply bled out. Julia did not call for help or contact the police. Instead, she turned to her boyfriend to ask for assistance in getting rid of the body. She did not want to go to jail for self-defense, believing that they would not believe her. By this point, investigators no longer believed a word she said. Additionally, the more than a dozen blows found only on the shirt were too much for self-defense. Her story about needing help from her new boyfriend was questionable, as he was known to be a sadist. It is unlikely that he was brought in solely to assist with getting rid of the body. Most likely, he also participated in the crime. However, no solid evidence was found. Julia ended her story by explaining how the body was wrapped in a tarpaulin and discarded off the highway. She insisted that the fabric was used only to disguise the remains. The police were convinced that she could have deliberately used a proven method to conceal human bones to fulfill her morbid fantasies. After all, maniacs are often prone to collecting items that remind them of their crimes. Julia's behavior did not resemble self-defense but clearly indicated an attempt to escape justice. Julia and Jonathan not only disposed of the body but also destroyed Brandon's mobile phone, attempted to eliminate traces of blood in the treehouse. They covered for each other when communicating with the authorities. There were no signs of struggle on Julia, and she was not morally traumatized by the events. Immediately after they disposed of the body, she and Jonathan simply went out for sushi. The detectives were finally able to confirm their suspicions after reviewing Julia's diaries. Judging by the last entries, she perceived Brandon's murder as a kind of gift for her new lover, who shared her peculiarities. Jonathan actively denied his involvement, insisting that he did not report the incident to law enforcement because Julia was scared and convinced him not to do so. She was absolutely certain that she would avoid punishment, as expressed in her diary in a rather crude manner. Additionally, Julia wrote that the torture and murder gave her body pleasure. It is evident that she would not have stopped there. In fact, each subsequent entry in the diary was more alarming than the last. The notes fully revealed the true nature of her interests. Julia repeatedly robbed graves and brought bones to add to her disturbing collection, which her boyfriend seemed not to be bothered by at all. In the first trial, Julia was charged with first-degree murder, and despite the overwhelming amount of evidence against her, she continued to insist that she was the victim of abuse. After her arrest, Jonathan, who was detained 2 weeks later, was charged with concealing evidence of a crime and perjury. He also did not admit guilt. Both were imprisoned and denied bail while awaiting trial. Julia's first trial was scheduled for November 2021. The prosecution insisted that the defendant planned Brandon Chickley's murder as an act of togetherness and a way to fulfill her vicious desires. Julia easily managed to lure him into a trap by promising intimate. Presumably, she brutally dealt with Brandon, then enlisted her new boyfriend to help get rid of the body and the traces of torture. Julia's deviant interests exceeded all reasonable limits. Shortly before Brandon's murder, she went to a family planning clinic to have an abortion. The staff confirmed that she persistently requested to keep the fetus, even attempting to bribe the doctors to allow her to take the unborn child home. It is obvious that the fetus would have become another exhibit in her collection. Of course, the lawyer tried his best to whitewash the image of the defendant and her accomplice. However, considering all the accumulated evidence, this proved to be quite difficult. Their only tactic was to smear the name of Brandon. The defense attorney tried to argue that Brandon was an abusive and a cruel, aggressive person, but all of this sounded extremely unconvincing. When Julia spoke at the trial, she cried while recounting how she was attacked by Brandon. She claimed that she managed to defend her honor only after she stabbed him in the throat, but she could not explain why she inflicted many other wounds. Despite the desperate attempts of the lawyer to defend her, the prosecution successfully painted a truly horrific image of Julia. The jury was adamant and found Julia Enright guilty, not of first-degree murder, but of second-degree murder, considering it an unintentional crime. In March 2022, the court announced the sentence of life imprisonment with the possibility of parole after 25 years. Upon hearing this decision, Julia burst into tears again, tearfully expressing that not a day goes by that she does not regret meeting Brandon. Julia never admitted guilt, calling the outcome of the trial a misunderstanding. Jonathan Lind, found guilty of giving false testimony, was sentenced to imprisonment for a term of 7 to 9 years. Welcome back, mystery lovers. Today's case is going to keep you on the edge of your seat. The case of Regina Krieger. Regina Krieger was born on March 3, 1980, to parents Rondo Freeman and Dan Krieger. She was a cheerful girl, had many friends, and a younger brother named Clifton. Regina enjoyed music and water skiing, which led her to join the youth ski club at Lake Myrtle. In addition, she is also a religious person and participating in the youth group at the Lutheran Church. However, as she entered her teenage years, she began to experience unpleasant changes in her life. In June 1994, Regina's parents divorced, and she struggled to cope with their separation. The division of their property created further tension, as they could not come to an agreement. In September of that year, Regina expressed her desire to live with her father, Dan. Though initially her mother opposed this decision, she chose not to make the situation worse and ultimately agreed to let Regina stay with Dan. From December 1994 onwards, Regina lived with her father in a relatively stable environment. However, soon after, she began to exhibit changes in her behavior and lifestyle. In January 1995, Regina, a ninth-grade student at Burley High School, started associating with a bad group of peers. Her parents noticed that something was off but found it difficult to get her to talk about it. Their relationship deteriorated, leading Regina to eventually cut ties with this bad company. During this period, she received support from a psychologist who was assisting her in coping with the difficulties related to her parents' divorce. They built a trusting relationship, which became a valuable source of support for her. She confided in the psychologist about her intention to drop out of school due to her poor academic performance and frequent absences. This decision was prompted by a warning letter from the school stating that she would be expelled if her absences continued. However, Regina later chose to focus on her studies and stay in school. On February 27, 1995, she expressed her desire to quit school and start working. The psychologist advocated for her with the school teacher, explaining that she was going through a difficult period. As a result, the teachers allowed her to attend certain classes where exams were held, enabling her to earn the necessary credits and avoid being held back a year. Regina seized this opportunity and planned to continue her education. On the same day, Regina returned home after a tough day at school. She lived with her father and younger brother on the second floor, while Regina's bedroom was in the basement. That evening, the family came together to have dinner, discuss important topics like school, and then they went to bed. Around 11 p.m., that was the last time anyone saw Regina alive. The next morning, February 28, 1995, Regina's younger brother Clifton called out to her since everyone else had already woken up, but she did not respond and seemed to be missing. Then, Clifton went downstairs to Regina's bedroom and discovered blood stains. But she was missing. He quickly reported this to their father, Dan, who came down and confirmed that his son was telling the truth. The bedroom was empty, and there were indeed suspicious blood stains. Dan then called emergency services 911 and reached out to his daughter's relatives and friends, hoping that she had run away to stay with someone. Unfortunately, his hopes were dashed when Regina's close friends denied that they had seen her. The police arrived quickly at the scene, but their investigation was not thorough. They only collected a blood-stained blanket and a martial arts training sword, without examining the area properly. The officers reported no signs of forced entry, which led them to believe that Regina had left home on her own and may have staged an attack. However, Dan rejected this idea, asking why Regina would go to the trouble of faking an attack and leaving behind blood stains. This explanation did not align with his perception of his daughter. Investigators took Dan's concerns seriously, launched an investigation. At that time, there were no advanced methods for analyzing human DNA, and tools like CCTV cameras were not commonly used. This hindered the detectives' ability to gather and assess evidence, which was already scarce. Initially, the focus was on the main suspects, the father and younger brother of Regina, Dan and Clifton. Both underwent polygraph tests and passed without any issues. Despite their cooperation, the father remained a suspect because the police had no other leads to follow. The father and brother stated they were asleep and did not notice anything unusual that night. Regina is presumed missing. There was enough blood in her room to suggest she had suffered a serious injury or had fought back, but not enough to conclude she was dead. It was thought that she might have escaped by hiding from an attacker or could have been kidnapped by someone she knew, as it was assumed she opened the door for the intruder. Otherwise, it would be hard to explain how the criminal entered her room without breaking down the door or windows. A crucial source of information for detectives was Regina's diary, which detailed her life experiences. The entries contained stories about her parents' divorce and the sadness it caused her. Additionally, the police found out that she had a boyfriend named Isidra, whom she had been secretive about with her family. He was identified as a Latino teenager living in Twin Falls and had grandparents in Burley, which is near the Regina family's home. Sidra was said to drive a green pickup truck. The police thoroughly examined these details and started looking for Sidra in hopes of gathering more information about Regina. However, they were unable to locate the truck, his parents, other relatives, or Sidra himself. It was speculated that Regina might have invented the boyfriend as a way to cope with the emotional struggles stemming from her parents' divorce. The Regina family was feeling hopeless and unsure of how to proceed in their search for their missing daughter. They clung to the hope of finding her alive, continuing to seek information and new witnesses. They printed about 30,000 flyers to distribute and post throughout the area. On April 15, 1995, a woman's body was discovered in the Snake River, showing severe signs of decomposition. It was located 15 kilometers from the home of Regina. Forensic experts confirmed that the body belonged to a young girl under 20 years old. By April 17, dental records were used to identify her as Regina Krieger. Tragically, it was determined that she had suffered multiple stab wounds, including a deep throat cut, leading to a violent and painful death. The case was updated from a missing person report to a premeditated murder investigation. News spread quickly throughout the small town, creating fear among the residents, who became more cautious. The thought of a possible serial killer targeting young girls heightened their anxiety, causing people to hesitate leaving their homes and to secure their doors with multiple locks. This was especially worrisome for Regina's father, who was anxious about the safety of his 13-year-old son, Clifton. Despite the community's heightened concern, the investigation made little progress, with the police receiving no valuable leads or tips. Eventually, detectives uncovered new information about the case. They discovered that Regina had associated with the wrong crowd and had met drug dealers, including a man named Gilberto Rodriguez. Authorities believed Regina's murder could be linked to a drug-related debt. At the time, Gilberto was 32 years old, and he often traveled between Burley and Twin Falls to distribute drugs. He was known to be part of a local gang and was considered dangerous. Regina bought expensive substances, making it hard to determine how much she owed, possibly hundreds of dollars, which was too much for a 14-year-old to afford. However, there is no direct evidence that Gilberto was involved in Regina's murder. Later, police received calls from anonymous informants, they claiming the dealer was involved in the girl's murder. But the callers would hang up when asked for details, fearing being identified. No one wanted to get involved with criminals, so the tips lacked specifics, and there is still no evidence against Gilberto. Detectives viewed he as merely a participant in illegal drug activities. However, the communication between Gilberto and Regina, 14 years old, has caused more suspicion. Distributing drugs to such young individuals was a grave accusation. Still, law enforcement needed important evidence to press charges. Investigators continued to examine Regina's friends, eventually they focusing on one individual, Cody, a friend of Regina's. He also bought drugs from Gilberto. On the night of the murder, Cody and Regina were also with the dealer, Gilberto. When questioned, Cody claimed Regina had spent the entire night passed out in the bathtub. However, his testimony was confusing. He appeared very anxious and changed his story multiple times, suggesting he was scared and possibly hiding something. Because of this, the police were doubtful about his statements. As a result, Gilberto continued to be the primary suspect in the case. In 1996, police were actively searching for Gilberto, who had previously been arrested multiple times in 1991 and 1993. Investigators believed he was involved in drug distribution, but they lacked sufficient evidence to charge him and secure a conviction. To catch him, the police devised a plan to set a trap. They arrested a man named Joe, who had previously bought drugs from Gilberto, and offered to overlook some of his past offenses if he would make another purchase from Gilberto. Joe agreed and bought $1,500 worth of drugs, leading to Gilberto's arrest on November 18, 1996. However, the difficulties are just beginning, as he is a cunning drug dealer who does not want to go to jail and intends to fight for his freedom. Rumors circulated about his involvement in serious crimes, including the deaths of Blake Morgan Jr. and Regina Krieger. These cases shared similar characteristics. The young man Blake was killed in his own home while he was sleeping, as attackers entered from the street. Unlike Regina, he was not kidnapped from his home. During the investigation on April 10, 1996, the police identified the criminals involved. They discovered that the deceased, Blake, was associated with Pal Cody, a client and associate of Gilberto. The second attacker was Jesus, Blake's half-brother. For Jesus, Gilberto is the ideal role model. He respects Gilberto very much and is always willing to do anything Gilberto asks, completely obeying Gilberto's wishes. As it turns out, the motive for the attack on Blake was unrelated to drugs, as Blake did not use them. Instead, it stemmed from an incident involving Angeli, a girl who was dating a Gilberto at the time. She claimed that Blake had insulted and hit her, prompting Gilberto to seek revenge. This led Jesus to point a 9mm pistol at Blake's head on April 9, 1996, just 2 weeks before Regina's death. The night before, Blake had a chance encounter with a group of troublemakers in a bar. Gilberto immediately informed Jesus that he wanted him to kill Blake, whom he considered an enemy for mistreating Angeli. The criminals, Gilberto and Jesus, planned their attack carefully to avoid detection, choosing not to strike in front of witnesses. Instead, they attempted to break into Blake's house around 2:30 a.m. but left when they found no one inside. This took place the night after their meeting in the bar. They returned around 3:30 a.m. and found Blake asleep. Jesus kicked in the door and murdered Blake by shooting him in the head. It is clear that Gilberto orchestrated these violent crimes, but he remained in the background to avoid being linked to them. Later, all 2 criminals, includes Gilberto and Jesus, were arrested and charged with first-degree murder for Blake's death. However, at that time, they were not considered suspects in the Regina Krieger case. Detectives did not even attempt to compare this crime to Regina's for a reason that is completely incomprehensible. They ignored the testimony of anonymous witnesses who had contacted police by phone earlier. They also have denied rumors that the 2 cases are connected. Gilberto, the dangerous dealer, remained in prison while awaiting sentencing. During this time, the Iowa State Department of Control of Controlled Substances was attempting to discover the identities of informants. In prison, there were rumors that Gilberto had already killed 2 informants and planned to eliminate the others. On June 26, 1997, Gilberto was sentenced to 30 years in prison, but he was released after serving just 10 years. For reasons that remain unclear, the police decided to suspend the investigation into Regina's case. For many years, the files containing evidence and testimonies sat untouched in an archive locker. New developments in the investigation were made possible by Gilberto's accomplice, Thompson. Thompson kept his secret for a long time, but it was eventually revealed, allowing the police to find Regina's killer and close this brutal murder case. In 2013, a new investigator took on the case and began by reviewing all the evidence collected by earlier detectives. While examining the crime scene photographs, he noticed a bloody trail that clearly indicated Regina had been dragged up the stairs and taken out to the backyard. It was puzzling how the previous detectives had overlooked this detail. The investigator thoroughly questioned all the witnesses, paying special attention to Thompson, who was serving a life sentence in prison. Thompson, now 31, he had been incarcerated since his teenage years and had a criminal record that included serious offenses like rape, burglary, and escape. He had even attacked the prison warden and killed a fellow inmate. The detective believed without a doubt that these criminals were responsible for Regina's murder, but they remained tight-lipped. Next, investigators reached out to one of Thompson's former cellmates, a long-term inmate who had entered prison in 2009. With nothing to lose, he agreed to cooperate with the police. His information allowed them to reconstruct the incident of the tragic night when Regina, a 14-year-old girl, was brutally killed. On the evening of February 27, 1995, Regina went to bed after 11 p.m., while her family slept, unaware of the impending horror. At that same time, Gilberto and Thompson were aimlessly driving around the neighborhood. When Gilberto remembered he had some unfinished business, he parked their car in the alley next to Regina's house to stop near her home. Thompson waited in the car while Gilberto made his way through the bushes and jumped over a fence. Gilberto entered a house through the back door, and Thompson kept watch from the vehicle. After a while, Gilberto returned and called Thompson to get out of the car. He explained that things had gone horribly wrong and that he needed help. He then went back into the house and emerged carrying a heavy object wrapped in a bloody blanket, which appeared to be a human body. Thompson assisted in loading the girl's body into the trunk, but couldn't get any details from Gilberto about what had happened. The two criminals, Gilberto and Thompson, left, but Gilberto buried the knife he used for the murder nearby. Later, Gilberto and Thompson attended a party where Gilberto casually walked around in a blood-stained t-shirt. Someone at the party might have called the police because of their suspicious behavior. After the party, Gilberto and Thompson went to a friend's house, where they changed clothes and cleaned off the blood. They then drove about 15 kilometers to a bridge over the Snake River. At the bridge, Thompson started to panic, and Gilberto pointed a gun at him, forcing him to throw the body into the river from the bridge. Thompson, scared, obeyed. Thompson returned home and locked himself in his room. He screamed in his sleep and acted very nervously. This made his family feel insecure. He was terrified of Gilberto, who had threatened him, and didn't want to reveal that he had thrown someone off the bridge. He tried to dismiss the incident as a bad dream. Later, at school, Thompson realized that Regina had gone missing from her home and everyone was searching for her. This realization made him panic because he knew he could be considered an accomplice, so he chose to stay silent. He was afraid not only for himself but also for his family, as Gilberto had threatened them too. Eventually, detectives spoke with Thompson, and he confirmed the information his cellmate had shared. Because he cooperated with the police, he was not charged in the Regina Krieger case. However, by that time, he was already serving a life sentence with no possibility of parole. On February 20, 2019, Gilberto Rodriguez, a dealer who had been evading authorities, was arrested for the murder of Regina Krieger. Despite the charges, he maintained his innocence. Following his arrest, new witnesses emerged, stating they saw Gilberto at a party on the night of the murder. Some witnesses reported he was wearing bloodied clothes but had no injuries. Others claimed to have seen him burying a knife nearby. Several anonymous individuals also stepped forward, having previously provided tips to the police. In October 2021, 58-year-old Gilberto Rodriguez was found guilty of first-degree murder in the case of Regina Krieger. He received a life sentence without the possibility of parole. It took 26 years to achieve this verdict, which brought relief not only to Regina's family but also to the entire community. Many felt safer knowing that this dangerous criminal would remain behind bars indefinitely. Hello again, true crime fans. We've got another mysterious case to explore. The case of Lauren Burke. Lauren Ashley Burke was born on December 30th, 1989, in Marietta, Georgia. Her parents, James Burke and Vivian Gershon, subsequently divorced. She had a sister named Jacqueline and a brother named Chad. After graduating from high school, Lauren attended Auburn University, where she studied graphic design, participated actively in the Delta Gamma sorority, played lacrosse, and engaged with the campus community. Lauren was described by her friends as a friendly and outstanding student, always smiling, happy, and eager to help. While in high school, she began dating a boy named Sean. After graduating, they both attended Auburn University, where they maintained their relationship. At this stage in their lives, education was a top priority for both. However, they also actively made future plans together. Sadly, not all of Lauren's dreams and aspirations were meant to be realized. On the morning of March 4, 2008, Lauren had breakfast at a cafe with her boyfriend, Sean. At 11 a.m., she attended class and then called her father, James, to talk about spring break plans and a dental visit. After her conversation with her father, she went to Sean's dorm and spent time there until the evening. She had a study appointment at 8:30 p.m. with her classmate, Michael, in the library. When Lauren left Sean's room around 8 p.m., it was already dark outside. She walked to her 2001 Honda Civic, which was parked in the lot beside the dorm. This was the last time Sean saw Lauren. Michael was supposed to meet Lauren at the library, but when she didn't show up, he began calling her cell phone repeatedly. After several calls, Lauren finally answered and informed him that she wouldn't be coming to the library because she had forgotten their appointment. She hung up shortly afterward. Later, around 9 p.m., 911 received a report about an injured girl lying on the road between Farmville Baptist Church and Route 280 on the 147 freeway. The girl was Lauren. Drivers stopped their cars, causing traffic to back up in both directions. Lauren was on her back in the middle of the road, struggling to breathe. She had multiple injuries and was only wearing socks. At 9:12 p.m., the first police car arrived at the scene, where Lauren was unconscious. A few minutes later, paramedics arrived and found her pulse barely detectable as they loaded her into the ambulance. By 9:35 p.m., Lauren was at East Alabama Medical Center, where doctors began attempts to save her life. Earlier, at 9:27 p.m., 911 dispatchers had received several reports of a car fire on the Auburn University campus, prompting an immediate response from firefighters and police. However, amidst a crowd of curious students gathered near the burning car, police could not locate the car owner. They checked the license plates and identified the car's owner as James Burke. James Burke is the father of Lauren. The police contacted him by phone to inform him that the Honda involved in a fire belonged to his daughter. Concerned, James immediately asked about her condition, but the police had no information. They did not know where Lauren was and confirmed that she was not in the burning car. After speaking with the officer, James tried calling Lauren's cell phone, but she didn't answer, increasing his worry. Unable to get in touch with her, he first called her friends, but none could provide any details about her location or the incident. Next, he reached out to his ex-wife hoping she might have some information, but she was also unaware of what had happened. At 9:40 p.m., Vivian called her daughter's boyfriend, Sean, to inform him that Lauren was missing and her car had been burned. Concerned, Sean reached out to mutual friends to see if anyone had seen Lauren that evening. He discovered that she had canceled a meeting at the library, claiming she had forgotten about it. However, Sean knew that Lauren had not forgotten, as she had planned to go directly to the library after leaving his place about 2 hours earlier. While family and friends were trying to locate Lauren, doctors at East Alabama Medical Center were working hard to save her life. They didn't know her name since she was brought in unconscious and without any personal belongings or identification. Sadly, despite the doctor's best efforts, they could not save Lauren's life, and she was pronounced dead about an hour after arriving at the hospital. The cause of death was a single bullet wound that had penetrated both of her lungs. Experts determined that the gun was fired from just a few inches away from her skin. Police officers, while investigating the connection between Lauren's death and a burned-out car on campus belonging to a missing person, quickly identified the victim as Lauren Burke. The day after her death, on March 5, 2008, James traveled from Atlanta to identify his daughter's body. The news of Lauren's death rapidly circulated throughout the campus. Auburn University issued a statement regarding Lauren's passing, advising students and staff to be more vigilant both on and off campus, while also reassuring them that the campus remained safe. The statement emphasized, "Many of you and your parents have called and are understandably concerned. There is no indication of any additional danger to campus or student safety." Auburn Police spokesman Captain Tom Stouffer stated, "We are dedicating all our resources to finding the person responsible for this crime." Auburn, Alabama is a peaceful community for students, and incidents like this affect us deeply. When someone is harmed or loses their life, it impacts us all. We will not stop until we identify the perpetrator. He also mentioned that Alabama Governor Bob Riley has announced a $10,000 reward for any information that leads to an arrest in Lauren's case. Lauren's burned car was transported to the Auburn Police Department, where investigators from the State Forensic Laboratory and officers from the State Fire Chief's office examined the charred interior. They discovered pieces of burned clothing, Lauren's melted digital camera, and the car owner's manual. A .38 caliber bullet was found under the front seat, suggesting that the car's interior may have been the crime scene and that the arsonist intended to destroy evidence by setting it on fire. Detectives interviewed Lauren's family, friends, and boyfriend, but none could identify anyone who wanted to harm her or had the motive to do so. Investigators searched Sean's dorm room, where Lauren had been before her death, but found no evidence linking him to the crime. After talking to Michael, whom Lauren was supposed to meet at the library, detectives learned that when Lauren answered his call, he heard a sound that resembled a moving car. Additionally, it was discovered that someone had used Lauren's bank card multiple times shortly after she was found on the road. This suggested that the person who used her bank card might be connected to her incident, prompting the police to start searching for him. Less than 3 days after Lauren's passing, an unexpected event occurred. On March 7, 2008, at 9:55 a.m., a man of African descent assaulted a 72-year-old woman in the parking lot of a Walmart in Noonan, Georgia, about 75 miles from Auburn. As she was getting into her car, he struck her on the head, threatened her, and ordered her to enter the passenger seat. After getting into the driver's seat, he attempted to flee the parking lot but realized that an eyewitness was following him while on the phone. The thought that the eyewitness might call the police made the man return to the Walmart parking lot. He parked the stolen vehicle, got out, ran to a nearby Chrysler Sebring, entered it, and quickly drove away. A few hours later, four officers pursued the fleeing Chrysler at high speed towards Columbus, West Georgia. The driver ignored all attempts to stop, putting other road users at risk. During the pursuit, police saw the driver throw something out of the window. One of the police teams stopped to search for the object and found a .38 caliber revolver on the side of the road. The chase continued until high vehicle broke down, causing smoke to pour from the hood. The driver suddenly stopped in the road and opened the door. A police officer on a motorcycle, chasing the suspect, collided with the open door. The impact caused the officer to be thrown over the handlebars and onto the pavement, but he was fortunately not seriously injured. The suspect then ran into the nearby woods in an attempt to escape. However, the police quickly apprehended him and placed handcuffs on his wrists. He was Courtney Lockhart, born on October 20th, 1984. His family remembers him as a friendly and fun-loving person until he joined the U.S. Army. He was deployed to Iraq in 2004 and returned in 2005, but he came back a changed man. His mother observed that he was no longer the Courtney she once knew. She noted that he had been cheerful before his deployment, but after returning from Iraq, he never smiled again. He became very cautious about his surroundings and sometimes even hid in the closet or under the bed. In 2006, Courtney and his girlfriend, who had already broken up, welcomed a daughter. That same year, he faced a court-martial for assaulting fellow soldiers, using illegal drugs, and deserting his unit without permission. He spent 7 months in detention and was dishonorably discharged from the Army in December 2006. As 2008 neared, Courtney's behavior deteriorated significantly. He rarely showered, stopped seeing his daughter, and became severely addicted to illegal drugs. In February 2008, he began a series of burglaries. Aside from one robbery at a convenience store, his approach was consistent. He would approach women from behind as they were getting into their cars in parking lots, threaten them with a gun, demand their purses, and try to steal their cars. One of these attacks led to the death of Lauren. Courtney's crime spree ended on March 7, 2008, when he attacked a 72-year-old woman and could not escape from the police. After his arrest, 23-year-old Courtney was brought to the police station, where he confessed to kidnapping and killing Lauren. The interrogation was videotaped and served as crucial evidence during the trial. Furthermore, Lauren's personal items, including her iPod and bank cards, were discovered in his car. Courtney provided a detailed description of the events from the day he kidnapped Lauren, which took place on Tuesday, March 4, 2008. Courtney woke up in his Chrysler Sebring after spending the night in his car near East Alabama Medical Center. He was in need of money, so he drove around Auburn searching for a potential target. It's important to mention that all his victims were women. He never targeted men. His drive took him to Auburn University, where he parked near the student dormitories. He spent several hours in his car observing the students. Around 8 p.m., he saw a girl walk up to the car next to him and casually open the door. It was Lauren. Without thinking much, Courtney grabbed his revolver and approached Lauren from behind, pressing the gun against her. He asked her how much money she had. When she didn't respond, he forced her into the front passenger seat of the car and took the driver's seat. Courtney claimed that Lauren didn't speak but screamed in fear. Once she calmed down, she took out $200 from her purse, gave it to him, and pleaded with him to let her go. Instead of leaving, he ordered Lauren to undress at gunpoint. Fearing for her safety, Lauren complied, removing all her clothing except for a pair of socks. Courtney believed that by making her undress, she would be less likely to try to escape. He then drove around Auburn, controlling the car with one hand while aiming the gun at Lauren with the other. As she tried to convince him not to go through with his plan, he lamented that his life was over. In response, Lauren promised to help him find a job. At one point, Lauren's phone rang. Courtney urged her to answer it and come up with a believable excuse. It was Michael calling, who was waiting for Lauren at the library. When she picked up the phone, she quickly said she had forgotten about the meeting and hung up. Courtney mentioned that they continued driving through the city, while Lauren persistently tried to persuade him to let her go, insisting that she could help him through his troubles. While driving on Highway 147, Lauren suddenly opened the door and attempted to jump out of the moving car. At that moment, Courtney accidentally fired a shot. The bullet struck both of Lauren's lungs, and she also suffered injuries from the fall. Despite her injuries, she was able to wave to passing drivers until she eventually lost consciousness. Courtney told investigators that he parked near the church and observed as cars began to stop next to Lauren on the pavement. Realizing that the police would arrive soon, he quickly fled, intending to destroy any evidence left in the car. Investigators began to question the truthfulness of Courtney's testimony. They suspected that Courtney had made Lauren undress, not to prevent her from escaping as he claimed, but for another reason altogether. However, Lauren managed to jump out of the moving car, foiling Courtney's intentions. The investigators also questioned whether Courtney had accidentally shot Lauren, as it seemed unlikely. He had served in the army and was familiar with firearms. It appeared more plausible that Lauren recognized Courtney wouldn't let her go and believed her only chance for escape was to jump out. As she opened the door and jumped out of the car, Courtney deliberately shot her. Ballistics testing confirmed that the bullet found in Lauren's car was fired from the gun that Courtney had discarded while fleeing from the police. Experts conducted tests and determined that the gun could not have discharged accidentally. The trigger needed to be pulled firmly to fire a shot. Lauren's family and friends held a farewell for her on March 9th, the same day investigators questioned Courtney for the second time. The following day, he was officially charged multiple times in connection with the Lauren Burke case. The trial commenced on November 8, 2010. Courtney's lawyers argued that their client suffered from a mental illness linked to his military service and that the shooting of Lauren was unintentional. Court records show that Courtney pleaded not guilty by reason of mental defect or insanity. A psychologist testified in court, stating that Courtney had an IQ of 86, which is below average, and exhibited some symptoms from his combat experience, although he did not have PTSD. The psychologist also described Courtney as immature and lacking clear judgment. The state tried to present evidence about Courtney's other crimes and his misconduct in the military, but the trial judge did not allow it. After the trial's guilt phase, the sentencing phase began right away. Courtney brought in witnesses and evidence to portray himself as a war hero who was mentally affected by combat and the death of his commanding officer. The jury reached a special verdict, noting that an additional aggravating factor was that a life was taken during the kidnapping. The jury unanimously recommended a sentence of life without the possibility of parole. However, the trial judge ultimately rejected the jury's recommendation for a lesser sentence and sentenced Courtney to death. In a detailed 28-page order, the judge outlined his reasons for this decision. He emphasized that the severity of the kidnapping made the death penalty justified. The victim, who was unarmed and chosen at random, was alone when she was abducted. The judge pointed out that the crime was particularly horrifying because it occurred on a college campus, a setting where students expect to feel safe. Courtney not only forced the victim into her own car but also made her undress and threatened her with a gun to prevent her from escaping. The court highlighted that the jury did not know about Courtney's criminal activities or the real details of their military service. While the jury received some information about Courtney's service, they were not informed about the complete disciplinary history. The judge noted that if the jury had been aware of this additional information, their recommendation for sentencing would probably have been different. 15 years have passed since Lauren's death, and Courtney remains was on death row in Alabama, continuing his efforts to appeal his sentence. After being convicted and sentenced to death, he first appealed to an Alabama court, which upheld his sentence in August 2013. In April 2014, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals rejected Courtney's request for a retrial. He subsequently appealed to the Supreme Court of Alabama, but his motion was denied again in September 2014. In January 2015, Courtney appealed to the Supreme Court of the United States, but in April 2015, his petition was also denied. In 2018, Courtney attempted once more to contest his sentence. Lawyers from a human rights organization, representing him, argued that the attorneys who defended Courtney in 2010 had mishandled his case. Although there were some issues with Courtney's defense in 2010, these issues did not affect the final decision and his death sentence was upheld. In April 2021, the Alabama Court of Criminal Appeals confirmed Courtney's death sentence. Lauren's parents are determined to prevent the overturning of Courtney Lockhart's death sentence. Jim, Lauren's father, stated, "Courtney Lockhart was responsible for my daughter's death. He deserves the death penalty." Vivian, Lauren's mother, added, "He didn't give her a second chance, so he shouldn't be given one either." Currently, Courtney Lockhart is still on death row in Alabama. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Lori Vallow. Chad Daybell was born on August 11, 1968, in Provo, Utah, a small town 18 miles south of Salt Lake City. He grew up in a humble family and was a quiet, shy child. In school, Chad was an average student with no standout talents or athletic skills, and he often felt self-conscious about his weight. After graduating from high school, Chad enrolled at Brigham Young University, BYU, in Utah, overcoming several challenges to do so. He a bachelor's degree in journalism in 1992. While in college, he married a woman named Tammy. The couple quickly had 5 children, 3 sons, Seth, Mark, and G, and 2 daughters, Emma and Leah. After completing his education, Chad worked as an editor for a local newspaper. To support his family through financial difficulties, he also took on jobs as a night watchman at a church and as a gravedigger at a nearby cemetery. Since Tammy focused on homemaking and raising their children, the family struggled to make ends meet. Chad then decided to use his journalism education to write a religious-themed book. He published his first work in 1999, which was a collection of religious stories and fantasy elements. To his surprise, the book became quite popular and earned him a big income. As a result, Chad quit his jobs at the cemetery and the newspaper to pursue writing full-time. About a year and a half later, he released another book titled 1 Foot in the Grave. This book was a science work in which he shared his experiences as a gravedigger and explored themes of death, the afterlife, and soul reincarnation. In 2004, Chad established his own publishing company, Spring Creek, to self-publish his writings. His works focused on views about the approaching end of the world and Judgment Day. Over time, some people noted that Chad's religious beliefs seemed to grow more intense. He published numerous fiction and popular science books that included religious themes. Additionally, he began hosting podcasts and creating audio and video sermons to help people prepare for the second coming of Christ. Chad referred to himself as an apocalyptic writer and claimed to have visions of the future, hear voices from the deceased, and receive unique prophecies. Lori Vallow was born on June 26, 1973, in Loma Linda, California. Growing up in a large family, she had 2 older brothers and 3 sisters. Her parents, Denise and Barry Cox, worked hard to support their children. From a young age, Lori was especially close to her older brother Alex, who was protective of her. During her school years, Lori was recognized as a true beauty and had many admirers. She was a charismatic blonde with a slender figure and an engaging smile, enjoying the spotlight and embodying a spirited, adventurous personality. In the spring of 1992, 18-year-old Lori married Nelson Yanes, with whom she had started dating during her senior year. However, they soon realized they had rushed into marriage and were unprepared for family life, resulting in their divorce less than a year later. They did not have any children together. In the fall of 1995, Lori remarried, this time to William Leah. A year later, they welcomed a son named Colby, but their marriage ended in 1998, just 2 years after his birth. In early 2001, Lori married Joseph Anthony Ryan, who adopted her son from her previous marriage, Colby. A year later, they had a daughter named Tylee, but their marriage ended in 2005. After the divorce, an incident occurred when Joseph came to visit the children. Lori's brother, Alex, attacked him, stating in court that he was protecting his sister's honor because Joseph had insulted her. Consequently, Alex was fined and received a short prison sentence. Lori married Charles shortly after divorcing her third husband, Joseph. They got married in February 2006, and Charles is 17 years older than Lori. Despite the age difference, it did not affect their relationship. Charles had been married before and had 2 teenage sons, Zachary and Nicholas, from those relationships. Lori and Charles lived in Nevada with Lori's children from her previous marriages, while Charles's sons would visit on holidays and weekends. Charles owned a small business that provided a stable income for his family. Lori, who had not pursued further education, did not work, but Charles never criticized her for it. In 2014, the couple officially adopted a young boy named Joshua Jackson, also known as JJ Vallow, who was Charles's grandnephew. JJ had autism and needed expensive therapy, which his relatives could afford. Towards the end of 2014, the family Charles decided to move to the Hawaiian Islands, specifically to Kauai. At that time, Zachary, Nicholas, and Colby were already adults living on their own, so the Charles family moved as a group of 4: Lori, Charles, Tylee, and JJ. The family Charles moved to a well-known tourist destination and decided to open a beach bar that focused on fresh juices, smoothies, refreshing drinks, and non-alcoholic cocktails. Despite their hard work and Charles's background in business, but the bar quickly failed due to strong competition. During this period, Lori an interest in religious literature, particularly a book series called Standing in Holy Places by Chad Daybell. She became so fascinated by the writer's Chad ideas that she became almost obsessed, buying all his books and reading them every day. In 2016, the family Charles had to leave Hawaii and move back to the mainland, settling in Arizona. While Charles worked diligently to support the family, his wife, Lori, became more engrossed in her religious beliefs, becoming disconnected from reality. In October 2018, Lori and her close friend Melanie went to an event titled Preparing People for the Second Coming of Christ, which was hosted by Chad in a nearby town. Excited to meet Chad, whom she admired greatly, Lori sat in the front row, completely focused on him, and Chad also noticed her attractive appearance. After the event, the writer Chad and religious speaker decided to personally exchange with his readers, while Lori, as expected, remained behind. She listened intently and asked if she could touch his hand. After she did, Chad looked into her eyes and revealed that they had been husband and wife in 7 previous lives. Lori and Chad exchanged contact information and began talking every day. A few weeks later, while Charles, Lori's husband, was away in Nevada for work, she invited Chad to host a gathering at her home. On that day, around 12 people gathered at the Lori house to discuss God, Judgment Day, and the Second Coming. Lori and Chad decided to work together to prepare people for the impending judgment. They started hosting podcasts about this event, delivering sermons, and writing articles. As time went on, Lori became more disconnected from reality in her family, but Charles did not notice this change right away. He believed it was just a temporary obsession that would eventually fade. By the time he recognized the severity of the situation, it was too late. Lori began to speak about dark spirits and zombies, claiming to her family and friends that she had been chosen by God for a special mission. This mission included the task of defeating the spirits of darkness, demons, and all evil. Charles's efforts to help his wife return to reality were unsuccessful, and she increasingly viewed him as a dark force that needed to be eliminated. By the end of 2018, Charles and Lori's marriage was nearing its end. In February 2019, while Charles was away on a week-long business trip, Lori replaced all the locks in their home. When he returned, Charles found himself locked out, noticed that both his car and the family truck were gone, and realized that $35,000 had been withdrawn from his bank account. Charles shouted for his wife and attempted to enter their home. In a chaotic manner, Lori rushed outside, shouting threats and insults. She yelled that his true self was gone and that a demon had taken over his body. Without hesitation, Charles went to the police station to report Lori for stealing from him and blocking his access to their home and children. He was worried that Lori had threatened to harm him, so he requested a protective order to keep Lori away from him. That evening, Charles's statements were documented as part of standard procedure. He mentioned his wife's intense religious beliefs, her expectation of an imminent apocalypse, and the tendency to categorize people into two groups, either light or demonic beings. Although the officers mocked him while asking questions, they still issued a protective order. The following day, Charles filed for divorce and changed the beneficiary of his $1 million life insurance policy from Lori to his mother and sister. Charles's lawyer explained that he was worried about the well-being of JJ, who needed special care. He believed that his mother and sister would responsibly manage the insurance money and care for JJ if anything happened to him. A few months later, Charles made the critical error of rescind the restraining order against Lori. Charles wanted to reconcile with Lori and save their marriage. So he started visiting her home. He missed the children and hoped for the family to come back together. On July 11, 2019, when he arrived to see his children, he was shot twice in the chest and died. Lori's brother, Alex, called emergency services to report the shooting and admitted to pulling the trigger. He claimed he acted in self-defense, stating that Charles attacked him first with a baseball bat. In response, he pulled out a pistol and fired 2 shots at Charles. The incident was witnessed by the homeowner and the children, and their accounts of what happened were mostly similar. The court determined that the incident was an accidental killing that occurred in self-defense. Although Charles had the potential to cause serious harm with a bat due to his history as a former baseball player, Alex's head injury was minor. On the same day Charles's body was taken to the morgue, Lori hosted a party at their home, complete with music, many guests, and a disco by the pool, right where her husband had been shot and where blood was still visible. She did not organize a funeral or inform anyone about what happened. A week after Charles died, his son, mother, sister and other family members discovered the incident when they learned that his body had not yet been claimed at the morgue. After Charles's death, a series of mysterious disappearances and deaths occurred. Lori sold their home in Arizona and moved with her children to Rexburg, Idaho, near Chad and Tammy, who lived in the area. Lori's brother, Alex, also moved in with them to the same housing complex. Lori's 16-year-old daughter, Tylee, did not attend school and was rarely seen outside. This led many neighbors to be unaware of Tylee's existence. At the same time, Lori described her daughter as a dark entity during a phone call with a friend. On September 8, 2019, Tylee, Lori, and Alex visited Yellowstone Park, where were joined by Chad. Although several photographs from this trip feature Tylee, she was never seen alive again after that day. On September 24, Lori withdrew JJ's records from school, stating he would be homeschooled. Following this, JJ, 7-year-old boy, was also not seen again. Less than a month later, on October 19, Chad's 49-year-old wife Tammy died unexpectedly. Chad claimed she had a cold and cough. She likely passed away from respiratory failure during her sleep, showing no signs of foul play. Her death was classified as natural. Interestingly, Chad refused to allow an autopsy to confirm the cause of death, a choice that raised no suspicions. After Tammy unexpectedly passed away, Chad received nearly $500,000 from her insurance policy. 2 weeks later, Chad and Lori went to Hawaii and got married in a ceremony by the beach. This surprised Chad's children, people who are still grieving the loss of their mothers and found it hard to understand their father's decision. When they returned to Arizona, Chad and Lori lived together and misled others by stating that Lori's children were staying with relatives or claiming she had no children at all. They also rented a small storage unit nearby and moved all the children's belongings there, as if they had never existed in their home. On December 12, 2019, Alex passed away unexpectedly at home. Although it seemed he died from a heart attack, so his death was classified as natural. As time went on, many people began to ask Lori about her children's whereabouts. While she was able to deceive neighbors and friends, it was more challenging to maintain her lies in front of family members. Colby, Lori's eldest son, had limited contact with his mother after he moved away. He made a real effort to contact his younger sister, Tylee. At first, Lori answered the calls using her daughter's phone, pretending to be Tylee. However, Colby quickly realized that something was wrong. Meanwhile, Charles's family wanted to see JJ. They requested to take him for holidays or weekends, or just wanted to chat with him on the phone, but Lori always refused or came up with strange excuses. Eventually, JJ's grandmother reported him missing to the police. Shortly after, Colby also went to the police to help find his younger sister, Tylee. When police officers visited Lori's home and requested to speak with her children, she falsely claimed they were with relatives. This turned out to be untrue, so the police returned to her house. They gave Lori a week to bring the children to the station, but instead, she and Chad escaped to Hawaii. On February 20, 2020, Lori was arrested on Kauai and brought back to Arizona. A search of her and Chad's home was conducted, but there were no signs of the children or evidence that they had ever been there. Chad, her husband, who had been defending her by claiming she had no children, soon became a suspect himself. On June 9, police found human remains buried in their backyard. Forensic analysis confirmed that the remains belonged to Tylee and her younger brother, JJ. Chad was quickly arrested for hiding evidence and being an accomplice. Authorities then chose to exhume the bodies of Tammy and Alex to determine how they died. In both cases, they discovered traces of chemicals that could cause heart failure, indicating that these individuals did not die of natural causes. The trial of Lori and Chad began in January 2021. They were charged with conspiring to commit serious crimes, committing fraud through grand theft, and engaging in insurance fraud. Additionally, the circumstances surrounding Charles's death were changed from self-defense to premeditated murder. During the trial, witnesses testified that Lori described her children as dark entities and claimed she could save their souls. There were concerns that the deaths of 16 years old, Tylee, and 7 years old, JJ, may have involved ritualistic practices. Notably, Tylee's body was found partially burned, and weeks before that, Chad sent Lori a people review email in which he rated Tylee as a level 2 dark soul. Due to the serious charges against Lori and Chad, there was a possibility of capital punishment. However, in May 2021, Lori's defense team successfully argued that she was incompetent, which paused the trial. Meanwhile, all 5 of Chad's adult children maintained their father's innocence, stating that he was framed by Lori and Alex. In 2022, after receiving treatment in a psychiatric facility, Lori was found competent to stand trial and face her charges. In March 2023, the judge decided that Lori Vallow would not receive the death penalty, a ruling that the prosecution is currently trying to appeal. Later, in July 2023, she was sentenced to life in prison without the possibility of parole. Meanwhile, on May 30, 2023, Chad Daybell was convicted of first-degree murder of his first wife, Tammy, and Lori's 2 children, Joshua, JJ, Vallow, and Tylee, as well as conspiracy to commit murder and insurance fraud. Chad Daybell then was sentenced to death on June 1, 2024. Hi everyone, thanks for returning. Let's unravel another perplexing mystery. The case of Christy Lynn Mullins. Christy Lynn Mullins was born on August 28, 1960, in Columbus, Ohio. She grew up in a family of 4 siblings, and they lived in a quiet neighborhood, away from the noise of the city. In the summer of 1975, when Christy was 14, she enjoyed spending time with her friends and sisters. They enjoyed going swimming at a nearby community, especially on hot days. Occasionally, Christy also babysat for families she knew. On August 22, a friend of Christy's asked her to babysit her child until late in the evening. The next day, Christy woke up around noon, and it was an extremely hot day, with temperatures reaching 93 degrees Fahrenheit. So Christy decided that a swim would be a great way to relax and cool off. She brought her younger sister, Kim, to the community with her. Kim jumped right into the water while Christy chose to relax on a lounge chair. A while later, her friend came to chat, and after a short conversation, the two left together. Kim was surprised when her sister, Christy, left her alone without saying a word. Instead of following her, Kim chose to stay at the pool. Later, when she returned home, her sister had not returned. After several hours without any sign of Christy, Kim began to worry. She decided to search the neighborhood for her sister and soon met a neighbor. The neighbor informed her that about an hour ago, the police had discovered the body of a little girl a few miles away, but they had not yet identified her. Kim rushed home to inform her parents of the situation. They quickly contacted the police, saying that their daughter was missing. The police advised them to go to the morgue, where they would show them the body of the dead girl. Initially, her parents had difficulty recognizing the girl because of the severe bruising on her face. However, the mother later discovered a birthmark on the girl's leg and recognized it as Christy. After identifying the girl, the police informed the shocked family of what had happened. At around 2:30 p.m., a man called 911 to report that he had found a human body in the woods behind the shopping center. He and his wife and son had gone there to buy toys for their children. Before entering the shopping center, the son asked to walk along a popular trail in the woods behind the building. This trail leads to a nearby river, which attracts casual walkers. After agreeing to let the boy walk, the parents allowed him to follow this path into the woods. When the family returned, they noticed a suspicious scene a short distance from the trail. Upon closer inspection, they saw a man lying on the ground, bending over someone and hitting them with a piece of wood. When the man discovered the family, he immediately got up and ran away. The father rushed to the scene and found a girl lying on the ground, covered in blood. His wife, who was studying medicine, tried to check for a pulse but could not find one. The father quickly ran to a nearby shopping mall and called the police from a store. He and his wife provided police with a description of the perpetrator. He was a young man, about 20 years old, tall and slim, with shoulder-length black hair. He was wearing jean shorts and boots at the time of the incident. Using this information, police created a sketch of the suspect and turned it over to patrol officers. The crime scene examination did not turn up any significant clues. Although police discovered a piece of wood that was used as the murder weapon, they were unable to find any evidence that could identify the perpetrator. Notable details from the crime scene included that Christy's hands were tied with telephone cords and that her clothing was in disarray, as her bikini top was pulled down and her t-shirt and shoes were found nearby. However, forensic analysis did not reveal any evidence of sexual assault. Police therefore theorized that the perpetrator may have intended to attack Christy, but something frightened him and he ran away. Christy's sister reported to police that she had left the pool with a friend named Carol. So they went to speak with Carol. Carol reported that she had received a suspicious phone call that day from an unidentified man claiming to be a local radio DJ. He told her about a cheerleading competition that was supposed to take place in their town, with the winners receiving free tickets to the state fair. The caller invited her to meet at the entrance to a forest trail behind the mall, where someone would provide more information about the event, which was supposed to start at 1:45 p.m. Carol's account of the events aroused the suspicions of the police. According to Carol, she had originally planned to attend the event with her sister. However, on the way, they encounter Christy and her sister. After a brief conversation, Carol invites Christy to come with her instead, and they decide to leave their sisters behind and head to the mall. When they reach the entrance to the woods, the girls sit on a fence and wait for someone to arrive. When no one appears after a while, Carol says she left Christy for a while to go to the mall and asks for the time. She returns a few minutes later, only to find Christy gone. Still waiting for a while longer, Christy does not reappear, prompting Carol to finally leave. The police investigation finds no evidence of cheerleading competitions in town as the anonymous caller had reported. This leads them to two possible explanations. The caller could be the killer trying to lure Carol into the woods, or it could be a prank unrelated to the murder. Unfortunately, the call cannot be traced, making it impossible to identify the caller. Further investigation uncovered inconsistencies in Carol's story. According to Carol, she had met Christy and her sister on the street while walking to the mall. However, Christy's sister, Kim, disputed this claim, saying that she and Christy were at the pool and that Carol had joined them there. But that was not all. Later that evening, Christy's mother met Carol, who lived just a few dozen meters from their home, and they had a rather strange conversation. Carol apologized and said that things had gone too far. She said that she was supposed to be the target and that there were two people involved in the murder. However, when Christy's mother tried to get more information, Carol ended the conversation and left. The mother reported this to the police, who questioned Carol again. But Carol denied making these statements, maintaining that her original story was true. She later took a lie detector test, but showed no signs of deception when asked questions critical to Christy's case. As a result, the police took her off the suspect list and focused on finding other leads. The city was thrown into a state of widespread fear as news of the brutal murder spread in the days that followed. This fear was compounded by a disturbing realization: the police suspected the killer was a local resident, as they seemed to have a good understanding of the area behind the shopping center. Spurred on by this new information, the police launched a massive investigation, using every available resource. Their efforts were finally rewarded 3 days after Christy's murder, when a significant breakthrough was made in the case. At approximately 5 p.m., a Columbus Police Patrol officer spotted a man who closely resembled the composite sketch of Christy's killer. The patrol officer quickly notified the case officers, who arrived at the scene and asked the man to accompany them to the station for questioning. The man, 25-year-old Jack Carmen, agreed to cooperate. However, the police faced a problem. Jack had a significant intellectual disability, with an IQ estimated at around 50, according to various tests. Because of his condition, Jack required specialized medical care and lived in an apartment provided by a nonprofit organization. He had difficulty with basic skills, including reading, writing, and speaking. Despite these challenges, the police on the Christy case could not ignore the striking resemblance between him and the composite sketch. Jack's interrogation was difficult and exhausting. Most of the time, he responded with short answers or remained silent. The police began to question whether Jack fully understood the meaning behind their questions. The interrogation lasted for 6 hours. Eventually, the police began to make some progress by asking the simplest and most specific questions possible. Using this approach, they were able to extract a confession from Jack. Jack stated that on the day of the incident, he began by leaving his apartment and taking a bus to the mall. His intention was to buy clothes, specifically pants and shirts. When he arrived at the mall, he walked across the parking lot toward the entrance and saw Christy sitting on a fence near a trail leading into the woods. Jack approached Christie, grabbed her, held her arms, and dragged her into the woods, where he assaulted her. After the assault, Christie attempted to flee. Jack caught up with her, picked up a nearby log, and repeatedly hit her on the head. He then fled the scene, running to the main road in front of the shopping center, where he boarded another bus. The next day, the police took Jack to the woods, where he identified the exact location of the crime scene. Jack also shared specific details with the police, such as the log breaking in half when it hit Christie, which only the perpetrator would know. The police assembled a lineup that included Jack and asked the couple who found Christie to identify the person they saw at the scene on the day of the crime. Both identified Jack. Jack was then formally charged with assault and murder. Although forensic experts found no evidence to confirm his testimony, Jack still confessed to committing sexual assault during the crime. Therefore, the prosecution decided not to dismiss the charges. The prosecutor initially sought the death penalty. However, Jack and his attorney opted for a plea bargain. Jack admitted his guilt to the judge, and as a result, he was sentenced to life in prison, avoiding the death penalty. The trial was quick, possibly due to the public interest in the case, with thousands of people following the proceedings. Just 11 days after the murder, on September 3rd, Jack Carman was officially sentenced to life in prison. After the trial, public perception of Jack's guilt began to change. As more information about his confession and personal life emerged in the media, many began to question whether he was truly capable of committing such a crime. Those close to Jack never suspected his involvement in the crime, describing him as a non-aggressive and timid person who often lied when forced to lie. And an incident at a charity center where he took the blame for a broken boiler, even though someone else had done it. Jack's ability to honestly confess to the crime has also been questioned. Although he had significant difficulty speaking, police claimed that Jack provided a detailed description of the crime. However, those who knew Jack's suspect at the police guided him by asking leading questions that included relevant facts from the case. This means that if they asked, "Did you hit the victim with a piece of wood?" and Jack answered, "Yes," it could be misinterpreted as a confession. A woman involved in Jack's treatment revealed that when pressed, Jack would confess to anything. If he was threatened with the electric chair, he would likely comply with whatever the police asked him to do. Those who support Jack's innocence have also found that the police brought him to the crime scene at the same time as the witnesses, the couple who later identified him at the police station. They had seen Jack and knew he was the suspect. However, the police maintained that the couple had never met Jack, a claim that many found hard to believe. Several other events raised serious doubts about Jack's involvement in the case. Police were unable to find the bus driver or any passengers who could confirm that Jack was on the bus he claimed to have taken home, as stated in his confession. Furthermore, several people at the charity building where Jack lived and worked gave testimony. They reported seeing Jack at 1:30 p.m. If he was indeed there, it is unlikely that he would have taken the bus to the shopping center on the outskirts of town and committed the murder at 1:50 p.m. He would have had to have taken the bus to the outskirts of town, which would have taken at least 40 minutes. Even if he had left immediately after being seen, the timestamps do not match. This led many to question Jack's guilt and believe that the police pressured him into a false confession. Even Christie's parents began to suspect that Jack was not the real killer. On September 9th, just 6 days after the verdict, about 70 people gathered in front of the town hall to draw attention to the case and demand a thorough investigation. A public committee was formed to fight for justice. This led to Jack finding new representation, as his new lawyer quickly filed a petition for a review of the case. A few months later, a judge revoked Jack's confession and ordered a new trial. Now, the prosecution had to prove his guilt almost from scratch, which seemed like an almost impossible task. Christ's father, Norman Mills, began his own investigation while preparations for the new trial were underway, dissatisfied with the police's efforts to find his daughter's killer. Not wanting to rely solely on the police, he took it upon himself to seek answers. Shortly after the murder, Norman and several neighbors searched the woods, where they discovered a pair of bloody jean shorts and men's underwear. They turned these items over to the police, who initially ignored them during their investigation. However, it remains unknown whether these items were connected to the case or were even tested. Jack's new trial began in 1977, 2 years after the murder. The defense team had two main goals: to prove Jack's innocence and to identify the real killer. They suspected Henry Newell, the 25-year-old man who had discovered Christ's body along with his wife, as a suspect. When the trial began, Jack's lawyers compiled a long list of reasons to suspect Henry of the murder, and the list continued to grow throughout the trial. Henry initially gained attention for his extensive criminal record. As a teenager, Henry had been in trouble with the law several times, leading to 3 prison terms. Notably, he escaped from prison twice before being caught and sent back. At the time of Jack's trial, Henry was serving his 4th prison sentence for arson in order to collect insurance money. Furthermore, when lawyers reviewed the evidence from Christ's case, they discovered several suspicious details. In his testimony, Henry claimed to have discovered the body, approached it, and tossed aside a piece of bloody wood. Although he explained that he was in shock at the time, this action still raised many questions. It is unclear why Henry would have picked up the murder weapon and moved it away from the body without any logical reason. He also claimed that he thought the girl was still alive and tried to save her by taking off his shirt and holding it to her face. This action was also suspicious, as it was unclear whether Henry was actually trying to stop the bleeding or if his shirt had become stained with blood during the killing, causing him to create an alibi for the stains. Jack's lawyer found a store employee at the mall where Henry ran to call the police. She said that he was not wearing a shirt but jean shorts. However, when the police arrived, Henry had changed into a different pair of pants. The employee also reported that Henry had a new, obvious bruise on his face, indicating that he had been beaten by someone. When asked why this detail was not disclosed to the police immediately, the employee said that no one asked her specifically about it. The police themselves should have noticed this bruise, but they ignored it at the time. Henry also agreed to take a polygraph test, but ended up vomiting into the machine, rendering the test uncompleted. The police did not conduct any further tests. Henry's neighbor was another key witness. He reported seeing fresh scratches on Henry's hands as they spoke on the night of the murder. The neighbor also claimed to have seen a telephone cord in Henry's garage that matched the cord used to tie the victim's hands. Furthermore, the neighbor shared a disturbing story that Henry had told him. Henry claimed that he knew Carol, Christ's 14-year-old friend, and that they had swum naked in the pool together when Henry was 25. This revelation shocked everyone involved in the case, as it revealed a disturbing relationship between Henry and Carol. While there was no concrete evidence to support this claim, it did suggest that Henry knew Carol, who was directly involved in the case. His wife Pam also testified in court. She said that everything happened exactly as they told the police on the first day. She explained that the family had gone to the mall and their son had wanted to go for a walk, which led them to the woods where they discovered the body. From that point on, Henry remained at home, only leaving briefly to chase away neighborhood kids who were throwing fireworks into their yard. Henry was brought from jail to testify in court, where he stuck to his original story and maintained his innocence in the case. One of the most important moments of the trial was the playing of the entire audio recording of Jack's interrogation. After watching the recording, it became clear that Jack had been pressured by the police to confess to the murder. Jack barely spoke and seemed to have no idea what the police wanted from him. However, a more dramatic development occurred on the 5th day of the trial when a surprise witness appeared, a testimony that neither the prosecution nor Jack's attorneys had anticipated. The surprise witness was Henry's stepson, Bobby, and his statements which shocked those following the case. The boy explained what had really happened that day. Henry had left the house to scare away some kids who were throwing firecrackers in their yard, but Henry had not only been out for a few minutes as his mother had said. Henry had been gone for more than half an hour. When Henry returned, he had lost his shirt and slippers and had scratches on his face and arms. Henry then spoke privately with Pam before telling Bobby that they were all going to the mall. However, instead of going shopping, Henry and Pam took Bobby to a nearby trail, where he had not asked to go for a walk. In the woods, they found one of Henry's torn slippers, and a little further, they came across Christ's body. Henry's mother told Bobby to keep what he had seen a secret. Years later, after talking to his biological father, Bobby decided it was time to reveal the truth. His grandmother also testified in court and recounted a strange incident involving Henry that occurred at Christ's funeral. On the way back, she said that it was a tragedy, and Henry suddenly replied, "It will teach her to keep quiet." In addition, a friend of Henry's testified that he had confessed to killing Christ. According to this friend, Henry claimed that the act was unintentional, not intentional. In the end, this trial left little doubt that Jack was not involved in the crime, and all charges against him were eventually dropped. But this is where things get interesting. Despite the overwhelming evidence pointing to Henry's involvement, the prosecutor stated that he had no intention of pursuing the case against him. The prosecutor criticized the police for ignoring many clues and evidence that were available from the beginning of the investigation. This criticism was met with widespread public outrage. As a result, the prosecutor agreed to reopen the case 2 days later. However, there was still a major problem. The new investigation relied heavily on the initial findings, including the statements of Henry and Pam. As a result, the police continued to operate under the initial assumption that Christie's body had been discovered in the woods with a long-haired shirtless man nearby. They focused on finding new suspects who fit this description, similar to Jack. Unsurprisingly, this approach yielded no results. Despite months of continued efforts, the case eventually stalled. Christie's father pursued justice relentlessly. He even filed a civil lawsuit against Jack, not because he thought Jack was guilty, but to gain access to the case files. By doing so, he hoped to gather more information about the case. Unfortunately, this effort was ultimately unsuccessful. Christie's father died of cancer in 2006, still without the answers he was looking for. For years, the investigation into Christie's murder went dormant, until 2013 when former attorney John Allard decided to reopen the case. John took the investigation into his own hands and contacted everyone involved, looking for new leads. Christie's family gave him a box full of her father's files, compiled over the years until his death. After reviewing the documents and speaking to dozens of people, John became convinced that the killer was none other than Henry. During the investigation, John discovered that Christie's friend Carol smoked marijuana and found evidence that she had purchased marijuana from Henry. This connection led John to suspect that Carol may have fabricated the story about meeting a DJ in the woods, and that she may have planned to meet Henry to buy marijuana instead. It is possible that Carol invited Christie along, using the DJ story as a convincing excuse. Alternatively, a darker scenario emerged, in which Carol may have acted on Henry's behalf, luring Christie into the woods to attack her. And Henry had scratches and bruises on his body, suggesting that Christie had fought back before she died. As John continued to investigate the case, he discovered that Henry had committed many other crimes, including arson, domestic violence, and assault. Another notable incident involved the death of Henry's wife, Pam, in 1982. Despite filing for divorce, Pam was still living with Henry when she was found dead in their apartment. The official cause of death was an overdose of sleeping pills. However, Pam's family members were skeptical and suggested that Henry may have altered the pills. What was even more unusual was that, although Pam had clearly consumed a large amount of sleeping pills, no packaging for the pills was found in the apartment, as she would have been unable to dispose of them after taking such a large amount. In 2013, Henry died of cancer at the age of 63, but John persisted in his quest for justice for Christie. He published a book compiling all the available information about the case, which sparked public interest. Christie's family, along with others, have called for the investigation to be reopened. Notably, some of Henry's relatives contacted John, confessing that their entire family knew Henry was the one who killed Christie but kept quiet. A family member of Henry's recounted that a few months before her 16th birthday, Henry gave her a car as a gift and they went for a drive together. At one point, he asked her to stop the car, turned to her and confessed to killing Christie, describing the crime in detail. The woman did not believe him, thinking he had made up the story because he had been drinking heavily. However, after reading a book about the case, the woman's memory of that conversation returned and the pieces of the puzzle began to fit together. This revelation eventually led to the reopening of the murder investigation in May 2014. The police thoroughly reinvestigated the case for several months, re-interviewing many witnesses and re-evaluating potential leads. A significant breakthrough came from Henry's confession to a family member, in which he claimed to have assaulted Christie. Initially, medical experts found no evidence to support this claim. However, using modern technology, police re-examined Christie's clothing and discovered small, previously undetected semen stains. Unfortunately, these stains were too small to extract enough DNA for analysis. The investigation dragged on until late 2015, when police held a press conference to announce their findings. 40 years after the murder, they finally announced that Henry was the one who committed the crime. However, since he was no longer alive, they were unable to take the case to court. As a result, the case was officially declared solved. Although some details of the crime remain unclear due to the lack of a confession, police felt confident that they understood the general circumstances surrounding the murder. It is possible that Henry went to the trail behind the shopping center after leaving his home. Carol may have asked him to meet her there to buy marijuana, but this has not been confirmed. When he arrived, he encountered Christie, who was alone, and decided to attack her. He tied her hands with telephone cords and took her deeper into the woods. Christie defended herself, scratching Henry and hitting him in the face. Henry may have then wrestled her to the ground and killed her with a nearby log. After the attack, Henry returned home and told his wife what had happened. Together, they devised a plan that would allow him to avoid being held accountable for his actions. Carol's involvement in the case remains unclear, and it's possible she will speak out one day. A recent press conference revealed that the police mishandled the case years ago, with the current police apologizing to the Christie family for the negligence of their predecessors. The initial evidence was enough to charge Henry with murder. But it appears the original police chose to ignore it. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Turpin family. David Allen Turpin was born on October 17, 1961, in Princeton, West Virginia, to Betty and James Turpin. He grew up in a deeply religious family. As a student at Princeton High School, David was actively involved in several extracurricular activities, including the Bible Club, chess club, science club, and a cappella chorus. After graduating from high school, he attended Virginia Tech University in Blacksburg, Virginia, where he studied electrical engineering. Notably, David demonstrated exceptional skills in computer engineering, which eventually led him to secure employment at prominent defense technology companies such as Northrop Grumman and Lockheed Martin. Louise Anna Turpin was born on May 24, 1968, in Princeton, West Virginia. She was the oldest of 6 children to parents Phyllis and Wayne Robinette. Her father was a preacher and her mother worked at Walmart and singing in their church choir. However, Louise's childhood was extremely painful. Her parents often argued, which resulted in them treating their 6 children very poorly. Louise, her younger sisters, and her mother were sexually abused as children by a family member, a traumatic experience. This dark family secret was hidden for years but was later revealed by Louise's younger sisters. Despite facing their own distress, Louise is protective by shielding her younger siblings from their abuser and comforting them during their parents' intense conflicts. Her younger sister Elizabeth described her as gentle, compassionate, and caring, always working to comfort them during this difficult time. When Louise was 15 years old, she met 22-year-old David Turpin at church, and then they started dating each other. Since they feared Louise's parents might not approve, they decided to keep their relationship private. After her mother, Phyllis, found out about the relationship, she initially had concerns but eventually accepted David and Louise's bond. This was partly because David came from a Christian family and partly due to Louise's reassurances. However, they still keep this relationship a secret from Louise's father, Wayne, as they were aware that he might be very upset if he found out. 5 years after graduating from Princeton High School, 23-year-old David visited the school where Louise was a student. He managed to convince the school staff to let him take Louise out of class. Louise willingly left with David, and they set off on a journey south to get married in secret. Their plan was to elope without telling anyone. When Louise's parents found out she was missing, they contacted the authorities. However, before the authorities can catch up with them, the couple had already reached Texas, where they intended to get married without anyone knowing. Surprisingly, David and Louise agreed to return to West Virginia without resistance. When they arrived, they thought that Wayne and Phyllis would be angry, but instead, they received a calm reaction. Initially, Wayne was angry with Phyllis for allowing their daughter to be in a relationship with David, but he eventually understood that he couldn't separate two people in love. Wayne eventually gave in and consented to their marriage. The couple got married in a simple ceremony in Pearisburg, Virginia, on February 11, 1985. 2 years later, Wayne and Phyllis got divorced, and Wayne started working as the chief deputy assessor in Mercia County. After her marriage, Louise began to drift away from her family. Free from her parents' rules, she was happy to start her own independent life. In 1988, Louise and her family welcomed their first child, a daughter. 18 months later, in 1990, they had another child. When David got a job transfer with General Dynamics, the family moved to Fort Worth, Texas, and settled in the modern neighborhood of Meadow Creek. With David's high-paying job, the Turpins enjoyed a luxurious lifestyle. To show off their new wealth, Louise invited her family from West Virginia to visit. Since she grew up without much money, Louise wanted to share her new success with her family. David and Louise kindly paid for their family's travel and accommodation expenses during the visit. In 1991, the Turpin family had a son, bringing them more joy. However, the family struggled with significant debt by 1992, despite David's high income. Instead of cutting back on spending, they continue to live a lavish lifestyle and continue to have more children. In 1993, Louise got pregnant with her fourth child, a girl. Every year, Louise's family visited the Turpins, but they didn't know the Turpins were struggling financially. To keep up appearances, Louise took care of all expenses during her family's visits, hiding their financial problems. In 1994, the Turpin family's eldest daughter started first grade at Meadow Creek Elementary. Her greasy and messy hair, dirty clothes, and poor hygiene suggested that she was being neglected by her parents. As a result, her classmates teased her and made fun of her for being dirty. The following year, 1995, the Turpin family had one more son. In 1996, they took a family trip to visit Louise's relatives. At the time, the Tippins were struggling financially, but they didn't seem to worry about it and continued to spend a lot of money, taking their relatives out to expensive meals. In the summer of 1996, Elizabeth, Louise's sister, traveled with the Turpin family to their home in Fort Worth for the holidays. During the trip, the family stopped at a casino in Louisiana, where Louise and David left Elizabeth in charge of the children while they gambled. Louise asked Elizabeth to keep their activities a secret. However, Louise's gamble was in direct conflict with her Christian upbringing, which taught her that gambling was morally wrong. Unfortunately, their gamble ended in losses, which led to a fierce argument between David and Louise. David believed Louise had a gambling problem and blamed her for their financial struggles. During her stay with the Turpin family, Elizabeth witnessed the family's disturbing dynamics firsthand. David and Louise showed little affection towards their children and controlled nearly every aspect of their lives. Simple tasks like using the restroom or eating required permission from David and Louise. Moreover, Elizabeth found David's behavior especially unsettling. He regularly entered the bathroom while she was showering, watching her and making her feeling discomfort and uncomfortable. The Turpin family's problems started to worsen in 1997. In May of that year, they had another child. However, in September, concerns about her oldest daughter's health began to emerge. She was dirty and showed signs of possible sexual abuse. As a result, she was taken to the principal's office to talk about her home life. Unfortunately, no action was taken to address her situation. The family had another child in 1998, increasing their number to 6. Despite David's high-paying job, the family fell deeply into debt due to their frequent gambling. This led to significant financial difficulties. In 1999, the eldest daughter stopped attending school, followed by the other children. The parents claimed they were homeschooling, but this was not true. The bank foreclosed on the family's Fort Worth home in 1998, forcing the Tippins to move to a less populated area in Rio Vista, Texas. However, the new house was kept in a disgusting state. The owners who moved in after the Tippins reported finding dirt stains and a foul smell, suggesting the presence of feces. Before moving to the Rio Vista house, the family had their 7th child. Between 2001 and 2007, the Turpin family had 5 more children, bringing the total to 13. As time went on, the parents' neglect turned into physical abuse. They would hit, slap, choke, and whip their children for minor reasons such as using the bathroom without permission. Shockingly, the children were only allowed to bathe once a year. The children were also malnourished. David and Louise bought delicious food, but they know to let their children eat it. Instead, they made their kids watch as they left the food untouched, leaving the children to suffer from hunger. This was a heartbreaking and inhumane situation that would have a profound impact on the children's lives. The children were severely malnourished due to being fed cheap frozen meals, leading to stunted physical growth and pale complexions that made them appear younger than their actual age. Additionally, the lack of social interaction and emotional abuse significantly impacted their mental development. In 2004, the Turpin family moved to a nicer trailer, leaving behind their previous home in Rio Vista. This decision was made because their old house had become uninhabitable due to the overwhelming amount of trash and dead rodents. In 2008, Louise had a conversation with her younger sister Teresa that left her stunned. Louise, 40, revealed that she and her husband David no longer attended church, a huge change from their family's strict Christian upbringing. Instead, David and Louise became interested in Satanism and used Ouija boards. Louise also confessed that them was involved in swinging, which meant they had sex with other couples they met online. What's more, they would often leave their younger children at home with their older siblings while they met strangers online. It became clear that Louise was the primary participant in these activities, with David acting as her accomplice by providing transportation and waiting for her during the encounters. This big change in her sister, Louise, from a caring and responsible person to someone almost unrecognizable, was deeply disturbing to Teresa. Meanwhile, the Turpin family moved to Marietta and made frequent visits to Disneyland, where they took many happy photos in matching outfits. Louise sent these photos to her family, with whom she had limited contact through Skype, and kept the children isolated from them. The photos reassured Louise's family that the children seemed to be in good spirits, despite appearing underweight. David and Louise had a strong fascination with Disneyland. This is evident from that they have come here many times. And they have recorded these experiences through photographs. In 2014, the family relocated to Peru, California, about 20 miles north of Paris, previously mentioned as Marietta. By this point, the abuse and violence against the children had become to extreme levels. David and Louise restrained the children to their beds using ropes, and if they tried to escape, they would replace the ropes with chains and padlocks. The children were forced to spend around 20 hours a day locked in their room, surrounded by a foul smell that filled the air. In 2015, the family had their 13th and final child. The family took a trip to Las Vegas to celebrate David and Louise's 30th wedding anniversary. They chose to renew their vows at the Elvis Chapel, which was a stark contrast to the abuse the children suffered at home. One of their children, 17 years old, found the courage to escape through a window and call the police to report the abuse. During the 20-minute 911 call, the girl described the terrible living conditions and the many abuses she and her siblings endured. She had photographic evidence and waited for the police to arrive. When they got there, they found a malnourished girl who looked much younger than her age. The girl gave the police pictures of the inside of the house. The police discovered the dark secrets the family had kept hidden. When police officers entered the house, they were immediately hit with a strong, foul smell that made it difficult to breathe. Despite the overpowering odor, they continued their search and were shocked by what they found. 3 of the younger children were chained to their beds. The house was extremely dirty and filled with trash, and the children did not have access to basic necessities like bathrooms. The police quickly took the younger children to the Riverside University Medical Center for care, while the older children were taken to the Corona Regional Medical Center for evaluation and treatment. On January 14, 2018, the authorities arrested David and Louise Turpin, accusing them of child abuse and torture. 4 days later, the couple was formally charged with multiple crimes, including 12 counts of torture, 7 counts of abusing a dependent adult, 6 counts of child abuse and neglect, and 12 counts of false imprisonment, with these charges applied to both David and Louise equally. Also faced a separate charge for engaging in a lewd act with a minor under the age of 14. Notably, among the Turpin children, the 2-year-old was unique in showing no apparent signs of abuse or torture. The Turpin children suffered severe physical and emotional abuse. The parents physically harmed them, including throwing them down the stairs, which resulted in nerve damage. The children lacked basic knowledge about life, further highlights the neglect they suffered. Although the parents bought toys for them, they were not allowed to play with these toys. The children's sleep was also severely restricted. They had to stay awake late into the night, often until 4 or 5 a.m., and were not permitted to go to bed before then. On January 24, 2018, the judge ordered David and Louise to have no direct contact with their children for 3 years. Any communication would have to be through their lawyers. A few months later, on June 21, 2018, the court decided there was enough evidence to put David and Louise on trial. Finally, on February 22, 2019, David and Louise changed their pleas, both pleading guilty to a total of 14 charges, including torture, abuse of dependent adults, false imprisonment, and dangerous for children. In a surprising turn of events, the court proceedings brought about an emotional reunion between the parents and their children. According to the children's statements, they had forgiven their parents and still loved them. Each child expressed concern for their parents' well-being and shared that they were doing well in their new lives. David and Louise, overcome with emotion, apologized sincerely for their past actions and expressed their deep love for their children, wishing them success and happiness. David and Louise was given a life imprisonment sentence with the possibility of parole after 25 years. As of March 2022, Louise, who is 53 years old, and David, who is 60 years old, are both eligible for parole in 2037. The severe abuse and neglect in the Turpin household shocked the community and left many questioning why it went undetected for so long. Hello, crime enthusiasts, are you ready for another chilling investigation? The case of Megan Landowski. Located on the shores of the Chesapeake Bay in Portsmouth, Virginia, is a bustling seaport town that is also home to both the U.S. Navy and Coast Guard. The town's tree-lined streets are home to naval officers and their families. Among them is Navy officer Chris Short, his wife Angela, and 3 stepchildren, Elizabeth, Megan, and Corey. After a year stationed at Guantanamo Bay, Cuba, Chris was transferred to a naval hospital in Portsmouth, much to his family's delight. 16-year-old Megan, the eldest of the siblings, was excited to start her new life in Portsmouth. She promptly signed up for dance classes, as she had a strong passion for dance. Megan had a natural ability and quickly excelled in various dance styles, starting with ballet. Her mother, Angela, described Megan as a lovely, friendly, and talented young woman who easily settled into her new school, Woodrow Wilson High School. Megan was a lively and kind person, and that helped her swiftly made friends at her prestigious dance high school. However, she longed to attend a regular high school to be with her neighborhood friends. On Thursday, April 10, 2008, Megan woke up early for school and had a conversation with her mother about an upcoming test. They said their goodbyes, and Megan headed off to class. Unbeknownst to her mother, Angela, this would be the last time she saw her daughter alive. Megan's school day finished earlier than usual, so she headed home. Her mother had asked her to call as soon as she arrived. When Megan got home, she left a voicemail for her mother, telling her all about her day, letting her know she was safe, and saying she loved her. After that, Megan started making herself some lunch. However, the situation took a devastating turn around 4 p.m. that day. Chris, Megan's stepfather, came home to find the front door open. At first, he wasn't too worried, knowing Megan had been reminded to keep it closed. But he planned to remind her again. As he called out her name while walking through the house, he was met with only silence. As he entered the kitchen, he was met with a horrific scene. Megan was lying lifeless on the floor, a victim of murder. Chris later described the scene, saying Megan looked like a porcelain doll, eerily still and staring blankly into space. Local detective Doug Funkhauser was on his way to celebrate his anniversary with his wife when he received a distressing call about the murder of a young girl in town. He rushed to the scene, where he was met with a shocking and disturbing sight. As he neared the house, he noticed blood stains on the door handle. Inside, he found Megan's body on the kitchen floor, partially naked and surrounded by a large pool of blood. She had multiple stab wounds on her back, neck, face, and throat, and her mouth was sealed shut with tape. As a seasoned investigator, Detective Doug had seen many brutal cases, but this one stood out due to the victim's young age. The fact that he had 3 children of his own made him even more determined to catch the perpetrator and bring them to justice. Investigators found no signs that the killer had broken into the house. However, a leaf found inside the house, which matched the bush outside the first-floor window, suggested that the attacker entered through that window. The assault is believed to have started in an upstairs bedroom. Signs of a struggle were evident, with the bed in disarray. On the floor, police found Megan's underwear. An adhesive tape box discovered under the bed was matched to the tape used to restrain Megan's arms and cover her face. Bloodstains on the tape were collected for further analysis. Additionally, pillows, sheets, and blankets from the bed were collected for forensic examination. Further investigation of the bedroom revealed new evidence. Seminal fluid was found on the duvet and in Megan's underwear, indicating that she had been sexually assaulted before being brutally murdered. Downstairs, Megan sustained 43 stab wounds, 11 of which were inflicted after she had already died. Her body was discovered naked from the waist down, with her arms bound behind her back using tape. The forensic team quickly identified a murder weapon when they noticed two knife was missing from its holder on the kitchen counter. Later, a knife was found in the sink. It was determined that Megan was first attacked in her room but managed to escape downstairs, where she was fatally assaulted. The perpetrator then moved through the house, leaving footprints behind. After washing their hands in the sink, they left one of the two knives used in the murder. The other knife, taken from the kitchen, was found in a nearby storm drain. Detectives urgently needed to catch the killer. They quickly started investigating, thoroughly searching the neighborhood for witnesses who may have seen or heard something suspicious during the crime. However, no one came forward with any relevant information. It seemed the perpetrator had escaped in broad daylight. The town was gripped with fear, as parents worried about their children's safety, and many were too afraid to sleep at night knowing a killer was still at large. After the initial shock of their daughter's murder, Angela and Chris quickly told the police who they suspected was responsible. They accused Robert Hickey, someone they used to know, who had a troubled past, and they were confident in their accusation. When Megan was 16, she was sexually assaulted by Robert Hickey, a Navy colleague of her stepfather Chris. Robert and Chris worked together as technicians and had become close friends. Chris and his family would often invite the Robert over. After being sexually assaulted, Megan became withdrawn and her grades started to slip. Chris noticed the change in her and asked what was wrong, but Megan was hesitant to talk about it at first. Eventually, she opened up to Chris and told him that Robert had been secretly assaulting her. Chris was furious and disgusted. He immediately cut off all ties with the Robert family and reported the incidents. 5 months before her murder, Megan's parents had started legal proceedings against Robert, and a trial was pending. Now, they suspected that Robert had killed Megan to prevent her from testifying against him in court. They thought he was afraid of damaging his reputation and going to prison. Megan had even expressed her fear that Robert would come after her, and sadly, it seemed her fears had come true. Officers went to Robert's home to search for evidence linking him to a murder. Although they didn't find any direct evidence, a later examination of his computer, they discovered he had deleted some data. A deleted file was recovered, containing illicit images of minors, which led to Robert being charged with possessing child pornography. This made him the main suspect in the murder investigation. When questioned about the murder, Robert appeared nervous but claimed he was at the Navy base all day. He denied any involvement and said he didn't leave the base. However, after checking his alibi with colleagues, police found a gap in his timeline, suggesting he could have been suspect. Security footage was checked, but it showed that Robert had not left the base. Despite this, he was still considered a suspect and could not be completely cleared of suspicion. A DNA sample was collected from Robert to compare with the DNA found at the crime scene. However, the results revealed that there was no match, ruling Robert out as Megan's killer. This unexpected outcome left the officers disheartened, as they were now without leads or suspects other. The focus then shifted to Chris, who had discovered Megan's body. After collecting a DNA sample, Chris was quickly cleared as a suspect. Megan's family members, including her younger brother Corey, were also eliminated as suspects. An autopsy showed that Megan was murdered with extreme brutality, described as an overkill. This level of violence indicated that the perpetrator was fueled by intense anger, which raised questions about their motive. Megan was well-liked and didn't appear to have any enemies. It seemed likely that the killer was someone she knew. However, the lack of obvious enemies made it even more puzzling as to who could have committed such a horrific crime. As the investigation continued without identifying any suspects, Megan's parents were faced with the disturbing reality that her case may remain unsolved forever, denying them justice for their daughter. To search new leads, detectives looked into Megan's school life, looking into whether she might have had a secret boyfriend, someone who admired her, or an enemy within her school. They questioned one of Megan's close friends, hoping to gain useful information, but the friend couldn't provide any significant details. The police then spoke with other people from Woodrow Wilson High School who knew Megan. They discovered that she had been in a few romantic relationships, but none of them were serious. Although none of these individuals seemed suspicious, but the police still took DNA samples from these people for further investigation. Forensic experts analyzed DNA evidence from the crime scene to determine the perpetrator's geographical origin. The results suggested that the perpetrator was an African-American male. After 6 months with no significant leads, a classmate provided a list of boys Megan had flirted with. The police reviewed the list and found that all the individuals, except one, had already been interviewed. The exception was 17-year-old Robert Lee Barnes. Megan had met Barnes through a performance arts program at Churchill High School, where they both participated. Megan had told a friend that she thought Barnes had feelings for her, but she didn't feel the same way. Barnes was a talented violinist and a diligent student with no disciplinary issues. He was friends with Megan and had visited her home several times. Her parents described him as polite and kind. When questioned by police, Barnes followed the standard procedure and described Megan as kind. Initially, the police interview with Robert did not raise any suspicions. However, when asked if he would be willing to provide a DNA sample, Robert hesitated, then he refusing. This refusal was unusual, as all of Megan's other classmates had agreed to cooperate. When questioned about his refusal, Robert explained that his mother would not approve of him providing a DNA sample. The police clarified that, as he's 17 years old, Robert did not need his mother's consent. Nevertheless, Robert declined again, leaving the investigators with the feeling that something was not quite right about him. At the end of the interview, Robert was requested to obtain his mother's consent for the DNA sample and to contact the investigators afterward. The next day, Robert requested a meeting with the investigators. When asked if he had obtained his mother's consent, he replied that he had not. However, he offered to provide a DNA sample in the form of the bubble gum he was chewing. He removed the gum from his mouth, placed it in a latex glove, and handed it over to the investigators. Despite this, the investigators continued to suspect that Robert might be hiding something. Later on, the detective got a call from the lab that was analyzing the bubble gum. The lab asked where the gum had come from. After the detective confirmed that he saw Barnes put the gum into the glove, the lab asked if Barnes was under constant watch. This was surprisingly, because the DNA on the gum belonged to a female. It turned out that Barnes had switched the gum he was chewing with a different piece, which he then gave as his sample. On October 23, 2008, Barnes was brought in for questioning again, this time with his mother. The police wanted to confront him with the DNA results. During the interview, after being questioned about the gum, Barnes made a slip of the tongue by saying, "This happened on Thursday." Up to that point, no individual interviewed by police knew the exact date and time of the murder. When questioned about this by the police, Barnes gave a very unreasonable and suspicious explanation. He said that Megan had invited him to her home. Upon arrival, he found her being held at gunpoint by a masked person. According to Barnes, the attacker then pointed the gun at him and forced him to tie Megan up. Barnes further said that he was forced to sexually assault Megan against his will. He then stated that they all went downstairs, where the assailant seized a knife and stabbed Megan. Additionally, Barnes stated that the attacker compelled him to inflict an injury on himself, thereby leaving his blood at the scene. However, Barnes had made up this story to make himself appear as a victim and explain away any evidence that might implicate him. The police were not convinced by his story and do not believe any of his testimony. Police presented Barnes with evidence of footprints found at the scene, noting that only his footprints were present, with no sign of the alleged assailant's footprints. However, before Barnes could respond, his mother interrupted, defending his character and stating that he was a good and innocent kid. However, after taking a DNA sample from Barnes and analyzing it, the results revealed a match between his DNA and DNA evidence from the crime scene, contradicting his claims of innocence. Consequently, Robert Lee Barnes was arrested and charged with the murder of Megan Landowski. Megan's parents were shocked by the news, and they struggled to understand how the quiet boy who rode the school bus with their daughter could commit such a violent act. According to the police investigation, Barnes likely entered the home through a window that afternoon, sexually assaulted Megan in her bedroom, finally brutally killing her. Megan managed to escape downstairs, but Barnes chased after her and stabbed her multiple times with a kitchen knife, even after she had died. He then left the scene and continued with his life as if nothing had happened. Investigators believe that Barnes had become fixated on Megan, who only wanted a friendship. When Megan rejected his advances, Barnes became coercive and violent, ultimately leading to a tragic outcome. In September 2009, Barnes accepted a plea deal that allowed him to avoid being tried as an adult, despite having turned 18. He pleaded guilty to first-degree murder and aggravated sexual battery. Robert Lee Barnes was sentenced to 42 years in prison and is currently serving his sentence at Red Onion State Prison in Wise County, Virginia. Regardless of whether Barnes was motivated by love, desire, anger, or rejection, nothing justifies his heinous actions. Instead of moving on, Barnes chose a dark path that led to a tragic end. This choice not only took an innocent life but also destroyed his own and hurt the people who Megan's loved ones. Hello friends, welcome to our channel. Today we're going to take a look at another horrible case with you. The case of Michelle Avila. Michelle Yvette Avila, people often call her Missy, was born on February 8, 1968, and grew up in Arleta, Los Angeles, with her mother and 3 brothers. She attended San Fernando High School, where she met her 2 best friends, Karen Severson and Laura Doyle. Michelle and Karen's close relationship began in childhood, but the two grew distant during high school. Michelle was known for her beauty and impressive long hair, which made her popular and well-liked among her peer group. Karen and Laura began to feel jealous because Michelle received a great deal of attention from others, especially boys. During Michelle's sophomore year, a rumor began to spread that she had relationships with many boys, all of whom had their own girlfriends. This rumor angered a group of girls who confronted Michelle outside the school. They brutally attacked her when she returned home. As a result of this brutal act, her attackers were brought to justice. The leader of the group was reported to be Sonia Bon. Michelle's parents immediately reported the ringleader of the attack. Michelle was scheduled to testify in court on October 8, 1985, but unfortunately, she never made it to court. In early September, Michelle had an argument with Karen and Laura, 2 of her close friends. The conflict arose from a rumor that had been circulating for over a year, accusing Michelle of having an affair with the boyfriend of one of them. Michelle then began dating a man named Randy at the start of her junior year, but their relationship lasted only about a month before she decided to end it. The reason for the breakup was Randy's constant partying, which Michelle could no longer tolerate. However, after breaking up with Michelle, Randy began dating Karen, and the two even moved in together after just a month. Despite this, Randy seemed to still have feelings for Michelle, as he frequently flirted with her, which made Karen unhappy. Michelle rejected Randy and informed him that she did not want to rekindle their relationship. Wanting to help Karen, Michelle advised her to consider ending her relationship with Randy and finding a better boyfriend. However, this advice angered Karen. As a result, Karen and Laura started spreading rumors again and decided to confront Michelle at a local park. During the confrontation, Michelle tried to appease Karen and Laura, reminding them that a similar situation had occurred the previous year and that she would never deliberately hurt them. Karen had argued with Michelle 10 days before she was murdered. During that argument, Karen yelled at Michelle, threatened her with a broken beer bottle, and pushed her to the ground before leaving with Laura. However, Laura later apologized to Michelle, and the two set aside their differences to continue their friendship. Karen did not contact Michelle for a while, but on October 1st, she sincerely apologized for her earlier behavior. This meant a lot to Michelle because she missed her friends, so the three of them decided to meet up at Stonehurst Park later that day. On October 1st, 1985, Michelle told her mother that she planned to go out with her friends. After gaining her mother's approval, on the condition that she be home by 6 p.m., Michelle went outside to wait for Laura to pick her up. When Laura arrived, they drove around before deciding to stop at Stonehurst Park. After parking, they waited for Karen to arrive. A few minutes later, Karen pulled into the parking lot, with Eva, their other friend, in the passenger seat. That's when things got worse for Michelle. When Karen pulled into the parking lot, she stopped very close to Laura's car and began to get angry. She rolled down her window and started yelling at Laura, using vulgar and abusive language. Laura also rolled down her window and responded to Karen with equally harsh language. Michelle and Eva sat in silence, watching their friend DS argue heatedly. Michelle had no idea what they were arguing about. Suddenly, Karen backed up and sped out of the parking lot, with Laura following closely behind. For 45 minutes, they drove at a high pace north of the city and into the mountains. Karen and Laura were driving so furiously that Michelle and Eva had to beg them to calm down and stop. The two girls finally drove to a parking lot that led to a large forest. Laura and Karen got out of the car, and an argument broke out, which escalated into a physical fight. Michelle also got out of the car in an attempt to stop her friends. However, as Michelle left the car, Karen and Laura suddenly stopped fighting and turned towards her. They were so close to Michelle that she could neither get back into the car nor move away from it. Karen smiled at Michelle and said that she and Laura were not arguing and were not angry with each other, but instead, they were angry with her. They informed her that the whole drama was just a ruse to lure her into the woods so they could confront her and punish her. They yelled at Michelle, revealing that they were the ones who spread the rumor because they were convinced that she had slept with their boyfriends, and they would not let her get away with it. Michelle tried to plead and convince them, insisting that she would never do such a thing and that she had never had sex with anyone, but they refused to listen. When Michelle started to remain quiet, Karen and Laura grabbed her and pushed her down a path into the woods. Michelle was very small, only 4 feet 10 inches tall and weighing 95 pounds, while Karen was 5 feet 2 inches tall and weighed over 200 pounds, and Laura was 5 feet 6 inches tall and weighed 135 pounds. Michelle was unable to defend herself against them. Then they repeatedly forced her to go further down the trail. Eva, on the other hand, stayed in the car the whole time the altercation occurred. Eventually, she got out of the car and started walking behind the group. Eva had not participated in any of the girls' actions in the woods, and she did not even know why they were taking Michelle in the first place. As the group left the parking area and headed deeper into the woods, Laura stopped and confronted Michelle, who was crying helplessly and fearfully. Laura punched Michelle in the face, and Karen immediately joined in the beating. In a matter of seconds, Michelle was beaten, punched, and stomped, lying motionless on the ground. When the group stopped, Laura took a knife and cut off chunks of Michelle's hair. They did this intentionally because they knew Michelle loved her long, beautiful hair. Karen wanted to join in the cutting but didn't have a knife, so she simply pulled at each strand of hair with her hands. Eva stood and watched everything unfold. After they finished cutting, they tied Michelle's hands behind her back and gagged her. Since they were about 10 feet away from a river, Laura walked down to the stream, looked directly at Michelle, splashed the W. a tear, and began teasing her, asking her to get into the water with her. When Michelle refused to budge, Karen grabbed Michelle and pulled her up, then pushed Michelle towards the river, causing her to fall down. With her hands tied behind her back, Michelle's face hit the ground, and she rolled into the river. Laura and Karen had held her body under 8 inches of water. When Michelle suddenly broke free from Karen's grasp and lifted her head above water, Eva heard her scream. After Michelle screamed, Karen grabbed her head and pushed her under the water. When the girls realized that Michelle was almost drowning, they let her go and ran to a large log, then brought it over and placed it on Michelle's head. Laura and Karen grabbed her and pulled her into the water, forcing Eva to run back down the trail to the cars. When she reached the parking lot, Eva realized that both cars were locked and they were too far away to call for help. She was forced to start walking back down the trail. After a while, she heard a terrifying scream. She stopped, returned to the car, and lay down on the ground in a fetal position, waiting for about an hour for the girls to return. Finally, she saw Laura and Karen, soaked and smiling happily. However, Michelle was not with them. After leaving the woods, they got into the car with Eva and headed home. For hours after the ordeal, Laura called Michelle's mother and asked to speak with her. When Michelle's mother, Irene Avila, said she thought her daughter was with Laura, Laura claimed she had dropped Michelle off with 3 boys in a blue Camaro after getting gas. Laura stated that she returned to the spot where she had dropped Michelle off, but both Michelle and the 3 boys were gone. On October 4, 1985, Michelle's body was found face down in a stream in Big Tujunga Canyon in the Angeles National Forest. 3 days later, a group of hikers contacted the police. When the police arrived, they discovered that Michelle had drowned in water only 8 inches deep. Her waist-length hair had been cut off, and a 4-foot-long log was found on her body. Police also found cigarettes, beer, and men's overalls near the location where Michelle's body was discovered. Detectives investigated the case based on the girls' statements that Michelle had been traveling with 3 men in a blue Camaro before she disappeared. This would explain some of the random items found around the crime scene. However, this statement led detectives to be misled and to search for men who did not exist for 3 years. Additionally, Irene later stated that she did not suspect Karen or Laura of being involved in her daughter's death, as both attended Michelle's funeral, and Laura even sent the family a condolence card along with $20. Karen moved in with Michelle's family for an extended period, showing her support and sympathy for them. She did her best to help catch the killers. In reality, however, Karen wanted to keep a close eye on the investigation and tried to avoid investigators as much as possible. Karen even slept in Michelle's bed and shared dinner with her family on several occasions. However, Karen was one of the girls responsible for Michelle's death. Karen also appeared to be haunted by the murder, visiting Michelle's grave several times a week and decorating her room with pictures of Michelle and newspaper articles about the case. She often went to the creek where Michelle's body was found. Once, Karen told Irene that she had seen Michelle's ghost. Detectives had no leads on the case until 3 years later, on July 26, 1988, when Eva drove 45 minutes into the mountains and turned herself into the police, revealing the entire story. She explained the rumors that had been circulating, the discord that had occurred among them, all the anger and jealousy, as well as every detail of the murder that she knew. Eva mentioned that it took her so long to come forward because Karen and Laura had threatened her, warning her not to say a word about any tea she had seen, for fear they would kill her. In March 1990, Karen and Laura were convicted of second-degree murder and sentenced to 15 years to life in prison. The jury later stated that they did not believe the murder was premeditated and dismissed the first-degree murder charge. Karen Severson was released on December 9, 2011, after serving 21.5 years, and Laura Doyle was released in December 2012 after serving 22 years. Karen Severson attempted to profit from writing a memoir about the murder and her life in prison, but her book did not sell well. She also appeared to have reached an agreement to make a movie about the murder, but Avila's family sued her in 2015, seeking to take profits from the sale of the work. As a result, the state of California passed Michelle's Law, which requires organizations that support the publication of works by criminals to contact the families of victims regarding such works. Michelle's story has sparked discussions about the effects of bullying, the complexities of teen relationships. Community initiatives and support networks have emerged to provide resources and support to those affected by similar experiences. As we remember Michelle, we honor her memory by working to create a world where friendships are built on trust and compassion. Her legacy serves as a reminder that every individual deserves respect, kindness, and the opportunity to live a life free from harm. Ultimately, Michelle Yvette "Missy" Avila's legacy will be one of courage and optimism. Hopefully, her memory will inspire us all to stand up against bullying, support those who have been betrayed, and work toward a future where understanding and empathy are prioritized. Welcome back, detectives. Let's dive into another horrible case. The case of Els van Doren. Els van Doren is a 38-year-old Belgian woman married to a jeweler in Antwerp named Jan de Wilde. They has 2 children, Vincent de Wilde and Carol de Wilde. Although she works in the family jewelry store, Elsa's real passion is skydiving. Els began skydiving with her husband in 1994. Gradually, her passion for skydiving grew rapidly over time. With over 2,300 jumps under her belt, she became an experienced skydiver. She devoted most of her weekends and holidays to the sport. In 1998, Els began skydiving in formation, and 3 years later, in 2001, she became a member of an all-female skydiving team called the Divas. The team competed in the 2003 World Parachute Championships, but Els was forced to leave the team in 2004 due to health problems stemming from a persistent hernia. After recovering, she turned to parachuting as a recreational activity instead of continuing to compete professionally. He became a member of the Swartberg Parachute Club, and by 2006, her jump total had exceeded 2,300. In the Parachute Club, she formed a close friendship with a fellow parachutist and schoolteacher, a 26-year-old named Els Klopmans. To differentiate between the two of them within the club, Els van Doren suggested calling Els Klopmans by the nickname Babs. They both learned to parachute under the guidance of Marcel Summers, another club member who knew both women. The trio developed a deep friendship and even became companions on their skydiving adventures. However, over time, Els found herself growing attached to Marcel, despite her husband. Their friendship gradually developed into a romantic relationship. Since her family was accustomed to her being away on weekends for the skydiving club, they did not suspect anything regarding her relationship with Marcel. Indeed, they often went to Marcel's apartment on weekends and stayed together without worries. Unbeknownst to Els and Babs, They not only shared the same name but also loved the same man. Marcel secretly maintained romantic relationships with both women. To keep the two relationships balanced, Marcel created a schedule. He devoted Fridays to Babs and Saturdays to Els. This arrangement initially worked to Marcel's advantage. However, it did not last long due to an unexpected event that occurred one particular weekend. On the evening of Friday, November 10, 2006, Babs went to Marcel's house as she did every week. At that time, she was unaware that Els had planned to surprise Marcel with an unexpected visit that night. Babs and Marcel had dinner together, and then they returned to Marcel's apartment. There, they found Els waiting outside the door. The content of their conversation is unknown, but it is certain that Babs did not sleep in the same bed as Marcel that night. Instead, Babs slept in a sleeping bag on the living room floor, while Els and Marcel went into the bedroom. In the living room, Babs discovered Elsa's parachute lying next to the other parachute equipment. She felt deeply hurt and betrayed that her friend had deceived and replaced her. These pent-up emotions pushed Babs to the point of committing a reckless act, leading to tragic consequences that no one could have foreseen. Then, on November 18, 2006, 12 members of the skydiving club, including Els, Babs, and Marcel, boarded a flight over Flanders. The plan was for Els, Babs, Marcel, and another skydiver named Tom to jump in a four-person formation at an altitude of 13,000 feet. In this formation, they would link arms before releasing and deploying their parachutes. As they prepared to jump, Els, Marcel, and Tom exited the plane as planned. However, it appears that Babs, perhaps due to a delay or on purpose, jumped a little later than the others. During the free fall, Babs was unable to catch up with the group. At 9,000 feet, Marcel, Els, and Tom broke formation, preparing to deploy their parachutes safely. At this point, it was clear that something serious had occurred, as Els tried to deploy her parachute by pulling the cord, but it refused to open. Trying to stay calm, she recalled the emergency procedures from her training. Having encountered a failed parachute before, she had successfully deployed her backup parachute on that occasion. However, in this case, hurtling through free fall at around 200 kilometers per hour, she had only 20 seconds or less to make a life-saving maneuver and land successfully. Despite her efforts, pulling the backup cord proved futile, and the parachute still did not respond. As her desperation grew, she continued to pull on both the main and backup parachutes, but there was no response. Marcel, who was at an altitude of 800 meters, observed Els, who was only 500 meters above the ground, and sensed that something was wrong because her parachute had not yet deployed. However, he could do nothing but watch the horrifying scene unfold. In a last desperate attempt, Els tried to untangle her parachute cord, hoping to activate it, but her fate was sealed. Meanwhile, in the town of Upabbeek, as these events unfolded, a woman was hanging her clothes out in her garden. A loud noise suddenly made her panic. Looking up, she witnessed a woman swooping down from the sky with a parachute aimed toward her garden. This sight was not unusual, as her residence was only a few kilometers away from the parachute club and its landing site. When she turned back to continue her laundry, the woman discovered a white cloth caught in the top of her bush. Moving closer, she saw a figure lying in the bushes. She quickly called her husband, who was also in the garden doing maintenance, and they contacted emergency services. It was Els, whom they assumed was one of the parachutists, but unfortunately, she showed no signs of life. Marcel, on the other hand, had found a safe landing spot, frantically calling for Els and trying to locate her. Spotting an ambulance, he gave chase, following it to the NEA RBY location where Els had landed. When he lunged toward her, he had to be restrained to allow the rescue team to approach. When the emergency services arrived, resuscitation efforts were made, but to no avail. Els was dead. Marcel insisted on keeping Elsa's parachute intact, stating that it was unusual that neither the main nor the backup parachute had opened. He then contacted her husband, Jan, to deliver the bad news. Jan rushed to his wife's side while Tom returned to the club to relay the sad news of Elsa's death to the other members. When news of Elsa's death was revealed, Babs, feeling overwhelmed, fell to her knees and cried bitterly. Elsa's husband, Jan, arrived at the club to collect her belongings and met Babs, who offered to help him retrieve Elsa's belongings. He observed her seemingly motionless and noticed a strange smile on her face. At that moment, Babs headed toward the dressing room, with Jan following closely behind. However, upon arriving, Babs abruptly slammed the door, locking Jan out. He recounted that it took Babs quite a while before she finally emerged with Elsa's belongings. Meanwhile, at the scene of the accident, police recovered Elsa's parachute and helmet, which was equipped with a video camera that recorded her fateful jump. An autopsy conducted to determine her condition but found no traces of alcohol or drugs that could have impaired her functioning. Her death was classified as either homicide or suicide, believed to have been caused by multiple fractures and internal bleeding from the impact of the fall. Elsa's family suspected that she might have been murdered by someone in her paragliding club who knew how parachutes worked. After the police revealed that Els had been having an affair with Marcel Summers for more than 5 years, the family's grief intensified. Jan was particularly hurt when he learned that other club members, some of whom he considered friends, also knew about the relationship. Additionally, Els had provided false info Mathion to her club friends, claiming that she was divorced from her husband. Her funeral took place just 1 day before her daughter Carol's 15th birthday. During the solemn ceremony, Carol was moved to share a heartfelt message. She recalled the family's constant advice to her mother to stop parachuting. Through her story, Carol clearly expressed how much her family missed her mother. She ended her speech by acknowledging her mother's desire for privacy and emphasizing that she would not have been happy to give up her hobby. After the funeral, the police launched an investigation due to growing concerns about the failure of Elsa's backup parachute. A parachuting expert familiar with parachute mechanics was called in to examine Elsa's parachute for any flaws or irregularities. The experts quickly discovered that a crucial component was missing: the pilot's parachute, a vital part of the system. The pilot's parachute plays a key role in deploying both the main and backup parachutes. The examination revealed that her parachute had been deliberately detached, suggesting outside interference. In addition, there were clear signs of tampering, notably with the main parachute, which the pilot was responsible for deploying, and one of the slings connected to the emergency parachute. When reviewing the final body camera footage of Elsa's jump, a striking detail emerged: an unidentified piece of red fabric hovering in front of her that was not part of Elsa's parachute equipment. Investigators are having trouble determining the origin of the red object, so they asked residents of UPAB to thoroughly check their gardens and the surrounding area. If they find the object, investigators advise them to handle it with care, as it may contain DNA from the person who sabotaged Elsa's parachute. Unfortunately, people were unable to locate this important piece of evidence. After Elsa's tragic death, an unexpected event occurred on Monday. Babs found the pilot's parachute. Babs reported that she discovered the parachute when returning from Marcel's apartment and that it had been stuck in a tree along the path between UPAB and Genk. Rather than contacting the police directly, Babs chose to inform Marcel of her discovery. Upon hearing this, Marcel called the police, who quickly arrived at the scene. When the police arrived, they found Babs anxious, confused, and clearly affected by the incident. However, they were skeptical of her story when she claimed that she had discovered the parachute by accident. She explained that it was a complete coincidence and that she had simply decided to take a different route home that day instead of her usual path. According to her account, while stuck behind a slow-moving tractor, she looked up and saw a parachute hovering about 20 meters above the ground, which made her think it might be a sign from the heavens from Els. However, the police were doubtful of this story, as only the investigators knew that the parachute was missing at the time. Meanwhile, the main suspects in Elsa's murder included her husband Jan, her lover Marcel, and her friend Babs. The police searched Marcel's house and concluded that he was not a suspect. They also ruled out Elsa's husband from the list of suspects. Next, the police expanded their investigation to Babs's house, where they seized many items, including Elsa's phone, laptop, and personal diary. These diaries had been recommended by a psychiatrist for Els to record her feelings. Babs was then asked to come to the police station for questioning to gather more information about her relationship with Marcel and Els, as well as to clarify the events leading up to Elsa's death. During questioning, Babs firmly denied any involvement in the destruction of Elsa's belongings. Instead, she attempted to blame Marcel, claiming that he had kept Elsa's belongings while she was at their home the previous weekend. She also accused Jan of keeping Elsa's belongings during the week. After the questioning, Babs was released and allowed to return home. However, a second questioning was scheduled for December 20, 2006, but Babs did not show up. Subsequent investigations revealed that she had attempted to end her own life early that morning. After taking an overdose of sleeping pills and antidepressants, she became unresponsive. Her mother rushed her to the hospital for emergency treatment. In letters written before the act, she shared with loved ones the pain of losing her best friend and the overwhelming stress of being considered the prime suspect in the murder. Babs was then admitted to a psychiatric facility for observation and treatment for 15 days. Having long been diagnosed with borderline personality disorder and depression, this was not the first time she had attempted to harm herself. Marcel believed she was merely trying to get attention and had severed ties with her. He thought her self-harm was a ploy to distract from her role in Elsa's death, rather than a genuine desire to end her life. Immerse. Elle suspected she had taken medication just before her mother returned home to create a dramatic situation. He believed the police were closing in on her and that they would arrest her once they uncovered her lies. At that time, while she was receiving psychiatric treatment, Babs was arrested on January 11, 2007, on suspicion of murder. On January 19, 2007, she appeared in court and was subsequently remanded in custody while the investigation was ongoing. Babs refused to take a polygraph test despite being asked to do so. Further investigation into Els van Doren's parachute equipment revealed that the parachute cord had been deliberately cut with scissors. Based on the cut marks, it was determined that the person who cut the parachute cord was probably right-handed. By March 2007, Babs had been detained for 3 months and had undergone extensive interrogation. Despite the intense pressure, she refused to admit her guilt. During the interrogation, Babs confessed to sending an anonymous letter to Els, in which she acknowledged that her actions towards Elsa's family were wrong. However, this letter was misunderstood by Jan, who thought it was merely a criticism of Elsa's frequent absences due to her passion for parachuting. He discarded the letter without taking it seriously, but it was actually a warning that Babs intended to send to Els to end her relationship with Marcel. Additionally, Babs admitted to calling Marcel anonymously at a time when he was with Els, intending to intimidate them both. Investigators closely examined Babs's automatic activation device. Upon examination, they noticed that she jumped later than the other members of the group. However, her parachute activated earlier, allowing her to observe the events that followed from above. This strategic move also enabled her to locate Elsa's parachute, which she could retrieve later. In September 2008, Babs's lawyer successfully secured her bail, and although the case was still under investigation, she continued to work at the school. Babs's murder trial began on September 24, 2010. During the trial, the prosecution expressed confidence in the evidence they had gathered and believed there was sufficient evidence to charge her with murder. The defense argued that the murder was motivated by Babs's jealousy over her lover's relationship with her best friend. Babs had previously confessed to investigators that she knew she was second to Els in Marcel's eyes. She admitted that Marcel liked Els more than he liked her, which made her feel inferior. The prosecution suggested that her desire to eliminate her rival and remove Els from the relationship provided a plausible motive for the murder. Babs's defense attorney argued that the prosecution based their case only on circumstantial evidence and unproven claims. In her testimony, Clarence stated that she did not see a future with Marcel and that her intimacy with him was a result of her low self-esteem. She also tried to imply that Carol, Elsa's doll, Gaida might have wanted to get back at her mother for being absent most weekends. Despite her sincere efforts to persuade the jury and shift blame, the jury's verdict remained the same. On October 20, 2010, Babs, whose real name was Els Klotmans, was convicted of murdering her friend, Els van Doren, and sentenced to 30 years in prison. She later appealed, arguing that the police had questioned her without her lawyer present. In May 2011, her appeal was denied. However, in June 2022, after a third appeal and serving 12 years and 6 months, Els Clarence was granted conditional release from prison and is now free.